It began in the ashes of defeat, born from the wreckage of a shattered Germany, and forged into one of the most feared and infamous military formations the world has ever known. The 2nd SS Panzer Division des Reich was not merely a fighting unit. It was a machine, a creation of ideology, discipline, and cruelty, built to embody the heart of the Nazi dream and the nightmare it unleashed upon Europe. From the frozen wastes of the Eastern Front to the bloodied fields of France, the men of des Reich left behind a trail of both military brilliance and moral ruin. They were elite soldiers and ruthless killers, armored spearheads and executioners in uniform. Their story is the story of the Waffen-SS itself. Courage corrupted by belief, skill consumed by fanaticism. This is the entire history of the des Reich division, from its rise in the early days of Hitler's empire to its final destruction in the ruins of Germany, a journey marked by terror, tactics, and the haunting echoes of what war does when humanity is replaced by ideology. The origins of Das Reich stretch back to the dawn of the Nazi state. In 1939, as the world stood on the brink of war, Hitler ordered the creation of an elite armed wing of his personal guard, the Waffen-SS, a force that would fight beside the Wehrmacht but remain loyal only to him. Among its earliest and most prestigious formations was the SS Verfügungsdivision, a composite of motorized infantry regiments trained for speed, precision, and ruthless aggression. Its men were handpicked not just for skill, but for ideological purity, soldiers who fought not for Germany, but for Hitler's vision of it. In 1940, as German panzers tore through France, the division proved its worth, storming across the Somme, crushing French defenses, and earning its first taste of both glory and blood. When the smoke cleared, it was renamed Das Reich, the Empire. From that moment on, the division became synonymous with the Nazi war machine's darkest efficiency. Under commanders like Paul Hausser, Walter Kruger, and later Heinz Lammerding, Das Reich transformed into a mechanized instrument of destruction. It fought in the Balkans, where entire villages were burned in reprisals against partisans. It fought on the Eastern Front, where the scale of brutality defied comprehension. When Hitler unleashed Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, Das Reich was among the first to cross the Soviet border. In the vast fields of Ukraine and Russia, its columns advanced relentlessly, cutting through Red Army defenses and leaving behind desolation. Cities like Kharkov became graveyards for both soldiers and civilians. The division earned its reputation as one of the most formidable armored forces in Europe, but also as one of the most feared. For every tactical victory, there was an atrocity. For every village captured, another was erased. As the years dragged on, and the Eastern Front turned against Germany, Das Reich adapted. Its tactics became honed through necessity. Fast, brutal strikes followed by calculated withdrawals, a deadly dance of endurance and aggression. In 1943, the division fought at Kharkov, where it played a central role in one of the most savage battles of the war. Under the brilliant yet merciless leadership of SS General Walter Kruger and the legendary SS commander Herbert Otto Gill, the men of Das Reich counterattacked with astonishing ferocity, recapturing the city in a whirlwind of fire and steel. For this they were celebrated as heroes by the German High Command, the very image of SS valor. But for the people of Kharkov and countless others, they were something else entirely, conquerors who killed without restraint. By the spring of 1944, Das Reich was refitting in southern France, its ranks replenished after the carnage of the Eastern Front. But the war had changed, the Allies were coming, and the tide of history was about to crash against the walls of Hitler's empire. When the Normandy landings began on June 6th, the division was ordered north to repel the invasion, a march of over 500 miles through occupied France. It would become one of the most infamous journeys of the war. Along the way, the men of Das Reich, harassed by French resistance fighters and desperate to reach the front, unleashed a campaign of terror unlike any other. In the villages of Tölz and Oradour-sur-Glane, their wrath became legend. In Tölz, 99 men were hanged from lampposts and balconies in reprisal for partisan attacks. In Oradour-sur-Glane, an entire village, 642 men, women, and children, was slaughtered in cold blood. The women and children were herded into a church and burned alive. The men were shot in barns, their bodies buried under rubble. When it was over, the village was left untouched, its ruins preserved as a monument to horror. These acts were not random. They were the logical conclusion of years of indoctrination. Soldiers taught that compassion was weakness, that vengeance was duty, that fear was power. By the time Das Reich reached Normandy, the war had already passed them by. The Allied advance, supported by overwhelming air power, shredded their columns from above. Bombed roads, strafed convoys, and fuel shortages turned their march into a nightmare. They fought savagely in the hedgerows of Caen, Falaise, and Mortain, battling the British and Americans with the same relentless determination that had defined them since the beginning. But this time, courage and cruelty were not enough. The division was mauled beyond recognition, its tanks destroyed, its men scattered. What crawled back across the Seine was a shadow of the once mighty Das Reich. As the Reich crumbled, Das Reich fought on, first in the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, then in Hungary, in a futile attempt to hold Budapest against the Red Army. Their last stand came not in victory, but in desperation, retreating across a collapsing front, fighting for a cause already lost. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, what remained of the division was captured in Austria. Its commanders, including Heinz Lammerding, would face post-war trials, though many escaped justice. The ruins of the Reich had swallowed their crimes, but not their memory. The story of the 2nd SS Panzer Division des Reich is not merely a chronicle of war. It is a mirror held up to the soul of an empire built on belief without morality. Militarily, they were superb, disciplined, tactical, unyielding. But their loyalty was not to humanity, nor to honor. It was to ideology. They were proof that courage alone does not make virtue, that skill in battle does not absolve the crimes committed in its name. They embodied both the heights of military professionalism and the depths of human depravity. Today, the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane still stand untouched, silent and eternal. Rusted cars sit where they were burned. The church's bell is cracked, its walls blackened. Children's toys lie frozen in time beneath layers of dust. It is the grave of Das Reich's legacy, the monument to the moment when the soldier became the monster. The division's story is the story of the Waffen-SS itself, born in loyalty, shaped by war, destroyed by its own belief. They fought to the end, but what they fought for turned to ashes beneath their feet. Tonight we return to that road, from Kharkov to Caen, from the fields of France to the ruins of Hungary, to follow the trail of a division that carried both the brilliance and the horror of the Third Reich. This is the entire history of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. Des Reich, the warriors of terror, the masters of mechanized war, and the men who proved that even in victory, evil can march in perfect order. Before we begin, tell me, Where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? Are you listening in peace, far from the smoke and screams of that terrible road? Or can you almost hear the rumble of those engines still echoing through the ruins of time? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. October 10th, 1939. Munich. The parade ground at the SS Kaserne gleams under autumn sun. Heinrich Himmler stands before a formation of 2,000 men, their black uniforms pressed to razor edges, their faces fixed forward with mechanical precision. These are not ordinary soldiers. They have been selected from over 12,000 applicants, measured not just for height and fitness, but for what the SS calls racial value and ideological purity. Himmler's voice carries across the silent ranks. You will be more than soldiers. You will be the sword arm of National Socialism. In this moment, a new military formation takes shape, one that will become synonymous with both tactical brilliance and unimaginable horror. They call themselves Das Reich. History will struggle to reconcile what they become. The myth begins immediately. Before Das Reich fires a shot in anger, the propaganda machinery declares them invincible. Nazi newsreels show these men as supermen, taller and stronger than average Wehrmacht soldiers, moving with athletic grace through training exercises. The statistics seem to support the narrative. The average height stands at 5 feet 11 inches, remarkable for a generation shaped by wartime malnutrition. Every man has completed 4 weeks of ideological indoctrination before touching a weapon. They train with equipment the regular army can only dream of: 40% more vehicles per battalion, 60% more automatic weapons. Yet behind this facade of perfection lies a more complex reality. These men are not born warriors descended from Teutonic knights. They are clerks and farmers, teachers and factory workers, transformed through systematic conditioning into something the world has never quite seen before. The architect of this transformation stands apart from the SS ideal. Paul Hausser, commanding general of Das Reich, looks nothing like Himmler's vision of Nordic supremacy. At age 59, he is old enough to be the father of most men under his command. His face carries the weary lines of a professional soldier who served in the Kaiser's army, who knows that real warfare bears little resemblance to parade ground ceremony. Hausser joined the SS in 1934, bringing with him 3 decades of military experience and a vision for how to forge the Waffen-SS into a credible fighting force. He demands discipline, not enthusiasm. He values tactical competence over political speeches. His officers notice that he rarely mentions race theory, but obsesses over radio communication protocols and combined arms coordination. This tension between ideological fantasy and military reality defines Das Reich from its first day. It never resolves. The division structure reveals ambitious intent. 3 motorized infantry regiments form the core: Deutschland, der Führer, and Langemark. 19,000 men, organized not as traditional infantry, but as a mobile striking force capable of independent operations. The reconnaissance battalion alone possesses more vehicles than an entire Wehrmacht infantry regiment. The artillery regiment trains not just to provide fire support, but to advance with the infantry, displacing forward under fire, a tactic that most armies consider suicidal. Each infantry section carries 2 MG-34 machine guns, where Wehrmacht doctrine calls for 1. This isn't just better equipment. It represents a different philosophy of warfare, one that prioritizes speed and violence of action over traditional notions of consolidation and security. Das Reich is being built to break things, to shatter defensive lines, and exploit the chaos that follows. Whether they can actually deliver remains uncertain. June 22nd, 1941. The Bug River Soviet-German border. 3:15 in the morning. Das Reich crosses into the Soviet Union in the first wave of Operation Barbarossa. The darkness erupts with artillery fire, thousands of guns firing simultaneously, the sound rolling across the landscape like physical pressure. Das Reich soldiers move forward in half-tracks and trucks, their headlights creating rivers of light through the dust. Within 18 hours, the division advances 50 miles, encountering scattered Soviet units too surprised to mount coherent resistance. The speed seems to validate everything Hausser has drilled into his men. They are not just fighting well, they are fighting differently, pushing forward even when ammunition runs low, bypassing strong points to maintain momentum. Soviet prisoners stare at them with confusion, unable to comprehend soldiers who refuse to slow down even when tactical wisdom suggests caution. This is Das Reich's introduction to the Eastern Front. It looks like triumph. It masks catastrophe gestating in their wake. But already, in these first hours, another pattern emerges. As Das Reich overruns Soviet border positions, they discover NKVD offices with documents being hastily burned. The political officers attempt to flee. Das Reich soldiers shoot them in the courtyards, 180 men killed in summary executions before the sun rises. No one orders these killings at divisional level. No written commands exist, yet the murders happen with casual efficiency, as if this is understood procedure. The officers who witness these actions file no reports. The enlisted men who perform them request no clarification. The ideological indoctrination that preceded military training has achieved its purpose. These soldiers do not distinguish between armed combatants and political enemies. This blurring of categories will define Das Reich's entire war. Military historians will later praise the division's tactical innovation in these opening days. War crimes investigators will note that the murders began in hour 1. Both facts are true. Neither explains the other. December 8th, 1941. Outside Moscow, the temperature reads -35 degrees Fahrenheit. Das Reich occupies frozen positions just 30 miles from the Kremlin, close enough that some men claim they can see the city's lights on clear nights. They have advanced 650 miles since June, fought through summer heat and autumn mud, ground down Soviet armies through relentless pressure. But they cannot advance further. The winter has arrived with brutal finality, freezing weapons, killing engines, turning simple movement into exhausting labor. Soviet counterattacks hammer the German lines, not with elegant maneuver, but with crude numerical weight. Das Reich receives an order it has never heard before: retreat. For the first time since formation, the division moves backward, abandoning positions bought with blood, losing 186 vehicles in 3 days as engines seize and transmissions fail. The men who stumble rearward through the snow are not the supermen who crossed the Bug River 6 months earlier. Das Reich suffers 60% casualties by year's end, 11,400 men killed or wounded from 19,000. The elite myth encounters mathematics. Mathematics wins. The toll extends beyond numbers on casualty reports. Officers note behavioral changes in survivors. A hardness that wasn't present in France. A casual cruelty towards civilians that becomes normalized. The war in the East is different. Das Reich encounters partisans who attack supply columns and disappear into forests. Soviet soldiers who fight to encirclement rather than surrender. A population that largely views German forces as invaders rather than liberators from Stalinism. The division's response escalates systematically. August 4th, 1941, the village of Elnya in Belarus. Partisans kill 6 Das Reich soldiers in an ambush. The regiment retaliates by executing 320 civilians, including 87 children. The justification in the after-action report claims partisan supporters, but presents no evidence of individual guilt. Wehrmacht General Heinz Guderian visits Das Reich command post days later and notes in his diary, "Excellent tactical soldiers, but methods concerning." He does not elaborate. He does not intervene. Modern day. The village of Oradour-sur-Glane in central France stands frozen in time, not preserved as a museum but left as ruins. Walls blackened by fire, the church steeple still standing over, collapsed walls. 642 names are carved into memorial stones. 247 are children. The ruins are Das Reich's most visible legacy, the place where their crimes became undeniable, even to those who wanted to look away. Tour guides lead visitors through the skeletal remains, explaining how on June 10, 1944, Das Reich soldiers separated men from women and children, machine-gunned the men in barns, locked the women and children in the church, and set it ablaze. The guides do not mention that the same unit that committed this massacre was simultaneously praised by Allied intelligence as one of the most effective German formations in Normandy. Both facts exist. They coexist uneasily, refusing reconciliation. The post-war reckoning begins at Nuremberg. 1946. Prosecutors introduce evidence linking Das Reich to systematic atrocities across Europe. The documentation is extensive: after-action reports, witness testimony, captured orders. The defendants employ 2 contradictory defense strategies simultaneously. First, they claim Das Reich was primarily a military formation, engaged in legitimate combat operations, not responsible for crimes committed by other SS units. Second, they argue that actions against partisans and civilians were necessary security measures in unconventional warfare. The prosecution dismantles both arguments methodically. They show that Das Reich's military excellence and its criminal conduct were not separate phenomena but intertwined realities. The division didn't commit atrocities despite being elite soldiers. The mindset that made them aggressive in combat made them ruthless toward anyone perceived as threatening German success. The judges acknowledge the complexity without accepting the excuses. Some Das Reich officers receive death sentences. Most receive prison terms. Many never face trial at all. Military historians confront an uncomfortable reality when studying Das Reich. The division genuinely was exceptional in tactical terms. Their performance in France demonstrated what aggressive, well-trained mobile forces could achieve. Their counterattack at Kharkov in 1943 stands as a textbook example of armored warfare. Their fighting retreat through Normandy showed remarkable skill under impossible conditions. Professional military education still studies Das Reich operations, extracting lessons about combined arms coordination and tactical initiative. Yet every analysis must grapple with the fact that this same unit massacred civilians systematically, that their commanders viewed terror against non-combatants as a legitimate tool. Can tactical excellence be studied separately from moral catastrophe? Should it be? The debates continue 75 years after the war's end. No consensus emerges. The question of motivation troubles investigators then and now. Why did teachers and farmers become mass murderers? The easy answer blames Nazi ideology, and ideology certainly provided framework and justification. Das Reich soldiers received intensive indoctrination that dehumanized Slavs, Jews, and political opponents. But ideology alone doesn't explain the progression. Many Wehrmacht units received similar indoctrination without producing equivalent atrocity rates. Something about Das Reich's specific culture accelerated the transformation. Perhaps the emphasis on elite identity created psychological permission. If you believe you're part of a special formation, exempt from normal rules, then normal moral constraints feel less binding. Perhaps the aggressive tactical doctrine bled into treatment of civilians. If hesitation in combat is weakness, then mercy toward enemies becomes betrayal of comrades. Perhaps the decentralized command structure, which made Das Reich so effective tactically, also distributed moral responsibility until no individual felt fully accountable. Most likely, all these factors combined, creating conditions where ordinary men performed extraordinary evil while maintaining self-image as honorable soldiers. The families of Das Reich soldiers face impossible burdens. After the war, many veterans return home and speak little of their service. They attend reunions of the division's survivors, gatherings that continue into the 2010s, where old men in their 80s and 90s share memories of comrades and battles. They insist they were soldiers, not criminals, that they followed orders and fought for their country like soldiers everywhere. Their children and grandchildren inherit this narrative, complicated by gradual revelation of what Das Reich actually did. Some families accept the historical record and publicly acknowledge their relatives' participation in criminal units. Others cling to the clean soldier myth, arguing their father or grandfather couldn't have known about massacres, must have been in different sections of the division. The psychological need to see family members as good people collides with documentary evidence. There are no easy resolutions. The past doesn't stay past. Historians notice patterns in Das Reich's behavior that illuminate how military units descend into criminality. The atrocities are not random acts of violence. They correlate with military frustration, appearing most frequently when the division faces setbacks or delays. At Elnya in August 1941, Das Reich is bogged down taking heavy casualties from Soviet counterattacks. The massacre follows partisan action, but targets civilians with no demonstrated connection. At Tölz in June 1944, resistance fighters ambush a convoy, and Das Reich responds by hanging 99 civilians from town balconies. At Oradour the next day, after French resistance has delayed the division's movement to Normandy for over 2 weeks, the massacre reaches its zenith. The pattern suggests that Das Reich, trained for aggressive mobile warfare, responds to impediments with escalating violence against whoever is available. Unable to defeat the actual enemy quickly, they assert dominance over helpless victims. This explanation doesn't excuse. It illuminates the mechanism by which tactical frustration transforms into war crimes. The legacy extends into contemporary politics and memory wars. Neo-Nazi groups appropriate Das Reich imagery, using the division's insignia and celebrating its tactical achievements while downplaying or denying its crimes. Veterans advocates argue for recognition of Das Reich soldiers as ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances, deserving the same honor as other combat veterans. Victims' families and historians push back, insisting that Das Reich's crimes disqualify it from valorization, that remembering tactical skill without acknowledging massacre falsifies history. European nations approach this legacy differently. France maintains Oradour as a national memorial, a shrine to innocent victims. Germany struggles with how to display SS units in military museums, balancing historical education against fear of glorification. The debates reveal deeper questions about how societies remember war. Can we acknowledge complexity without sliding into moral equivalence? Can we judge the past without self-righteous presentism? Das Reich forces these questions into sharp focus. The division's story resists simple narrative. They were neither comic book villains nor misunderstood heroes. They were well-trained soldiers who committed systematic atrocities, tactical innovators who murdered civilians, men who showed courage under fire and cowardice toward helpless victims. Understanding Das Reich requires holding contradictory truths simultaneously: military effectiveness and moral bankruptcy, individual acts of decency and collective participation in evil. This is uncomfortable. It would be easier to dismiss them as monsters or to rehabilitate them as victims of circumstance. History offers neither comfort. Das Reich reveals how ordinary military virtues like courage, loyalty, and tactical skill can serve monstrous ends when unmoored from ethical constraints. They show that elite units can be elite precisely because they're willing to cross lines others won't. They prove that some questions don't have answers, only deeper complications. The men who marched across that Munich parade ground in October 1939 could not foresee what they would become. Most imagined glory, victory parades, perhaps death in combat. Few anticipated the villages they would burn, the civilians they would murder, the legacy of shame they would create. The transformation happened gradually, decision by decision, until men who once taught school or fixed cars found themselves standing over mass graves. Das Reich demonstrates how military culture, ideology, and circumstantial pressure can reshape human behavior beyond recognition. Understanding this process doesn't excuse individual choices, but it reminds us that evil rarely announces itself as evil. It arrives dressed in familiar uniforms, speaking of duty and loyalty, justifying each step as necessary. The elite myth that Himmler proclaimed in 1939 didn't survive contact with reality. What emerged instead was far more troubling: proof that elite military status and systematic criminality not only coexist, but can reinforce each other. This is Das Reich's true legacy, not their tactics or their courage, but the warning they represent about what happens when military excellence serves moral collapse. January 15, 1938. SS Junkerschule, Bad Tölz, Bavaria. The Alpine air cuts like a blade as 120 officer candidates stand at attention in the pre-dawn darkness. They have been awake since 4 in the morning, having already completed 2 hours of physical training that would break most men. Now they file into a lecture hall, where portraits of Hitler and Himmler dominate the walls. For the next 3 hours, they will receive instruction on racial theory, the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy, and the historical destiny of the Germanic peoples. Then, without pause, they will transition to tactical problems, map reading, and fire control procedures. This is the pattern of their days: ideology and warfare blended until no distinction remains. The instructors never explain why both subjects deserve equal time. The implication is clear without words. To be an SS officer means understanding that military operations and political warfare are the same thing. The men who graduate from this school will carry this fusion into every battle they fight. They will never separate the two again. The training system that produces Das Reich officers represents Heinrich Himmler's attempt to create something unprecedented: a military force that derives its effectiveness from ideological commitment rather than traditional Prussian professionalism. He rejects the old officer corps model, where aristocratic bearing and studied detachment define leadership. SS officers must be believers, men who see combat as an extension of political struggle. But Himmler faces a fundamental problem. Belief alone doesn't win battles. The early SS military formations performed poorly in Poland. Brave but tactically incompetent, suffering casualties that shocked even sympathetic Wehrmacht observers. This is why Paul Hausser matters. Hausser brings 3 decades of professional military experience, a cold understanding that ideology makes soldiers willing to die but not competent to fight. He must somehow merge Himmler's vision with actual military effectiveness. The compromise he engineers shapes Deutsche Reich's entire character. They will be true believers who also happen to be exceptionally well trained. Whether these two qualities can coexist without one destroying the other remains an open question. The officer candidates at Bad Tölz endure a program designed to break and remake them. 16-hour days stretch across 8 months, combining academic instruction, physical conditioning, and field exercises. The physical standards exceed Wehrmacht requirements by substantial margins. Candidates must complete a 5-mile run in under 40 minutes while carrying full combat equipment. They must swim 2 miles in regulation uniform. Hand-to-hand combat training occurs daily, not as sport but as violent preparation for close-quarters killing. 1 in 8 candidates suffers serious injury during training, a casualty rate that would scandalize civilian institutions, but which the SS considers proof of seriousness. The academic curriculum ranges across military history, tactics, engineering, and communications. But every subject circles back to ideology. A lecture on Napoleon's Russian campaign concludes with analysis of how racial weakness doomed the French effort. A class on fortification design includes discussion of how German engineering superiority reflects genetic inheritance. The message saturates every moment. You are not just soldiers, you are warriors in a racial struggle that transcends conventional military victory. Felix Steiner emerges as the tactical architect of Das Reich's combat doctrine. A decorated veteran of the First World War, Steiner joined the SS in 1935 and immediately began revolutionizing infantry training. He rejects static defensive tactics that dominated European military thinking. Instead, he develops what he calls combat school methods that emphasize aggression, initiative, and speed. Steiner's infantry doesn't advance in neat lines, but in loose formations that flow around resistance. His soldiers train to fight independently when separated from officers, trusting individual initiative over rigid adherence to plans. Every man learns multiple weapon systems so squads can adapt to casualties without losing capability. Most radically, Steiner demands that infantry train with armor and artillery, practicing combined arms coordination that Wehrmacht divisions rarely achieve. His methods are punishing. Training days stretch 16 hours against the Wehrmacht's 10. Live ammunition features in exercises, producing training casualties that shock traditionalists. But the results are undeniable. Das Reich soldiers develop an aggressive mindset that treats contact with the enemy not as something to avoid, but as opportunity to be seized. The equipment priorities reveal how seriously Hitler takes the SS formations. Das Reich receives Panzer III tanks before some Wehrmacht Panzer divisions, a political decision that infuriates army commanders who see their requests denied, while SS units get preferential treatment. Division's infantry travels in half-tracks and trucks, while most Wehrmacht infantry marches on foot. Every Das Reich platoon receives a field radio at a time when Wehrmacht companies often share a single set. The machine gun density reaches levels that Allied forces won't match until 1944. This equipment advantage isn't merely quantitative, it enables tactical approaches impossible for standard infantry. Das Reich can concentrate force rapidly because motorization allows quick redeployment. They can coordinate complex attacks because radio communication links all units. They can sustain higher casualty rates because superior firepower provides tactical edge even when outnumbered. Critics accuse Hitler of favoritism, and they're correct. But the favoritism has strategic logic. Hitler is investing in a formation designed to execute the most demanding missions, to serve as crisis responders who can attack or defend anywhere along vast front lines. March 1940. Greifenwöhr Training Ground, Bavaria. Das Reich conducts its final large-scale exercises before commitment to combat. For 2 weeks, the entire division maneuvers across the Bavarian countryside, practicing the aggressive mobile warfare that Hausser envisions. Reconnaissance units probe forward, locating simulated enemy positions. Artillery displaces constantly, firing then moving before counter-battery fire can arrive. Infantry attacks in successive waves, each exploiting openings created by predecessors. The tempo exhausts everyone involved. Units operate continuously for 72 hours, sleeping in shifts, eating while moving. Umpires from Wehrmacht, High Command observe with mixed reactions. The tactical results impress. Das Reich demonstrates coordination that took regular army units years to develop. But the methods worry traditionalists. Das Reich ignores doctrine that calls for consolidation after advances, instead pushing forward even when flanks remain exposed. They accept risk that conventional military wisdom considers reckless. Hausser defends the approach: we train for decisive action, not methodical attrition. Our advantage lies in speed and shock. If we fight like everyone else, we lose our purpose. The officer corps that emerges from this training system reflects uncomfortable compromises. 60% come from Wehrmacht or Reichswehr backgrounds, professional soldiers who joined the SS for various reasons: ambition, ideological commitment, or simply better career prospects. They bring tactical competence and military conservatism. 40% are pure SS men, raised entirely within the organization, ideologically reliable but often tactically naive. The two groups eye each other with suspicion. The Wehrmacht transfers resent political lectures and SS bureaucracy. The SS originals doubt whether the transfers truly believe in National Socialist principles. Hausser must manage this tension carefully, using the professionals to train the believers while ensuring the believers' enthusiasm isn't dampened by professional skepticism. The division that results is neither pure ideology nor pure professionalism, but an unstable mixture of both. This instability becomes a source of both strength and danger. The professionals provide tactical skill. The believers provide willingness to take casualties and ignore conventional restraints. Together they create something more formidable than either group alone. But the absence of traditional military ethics leaves dangerous vacuum. Personal stories illuminate the transformation process. Otto Weidinger, age 28, joins Der Führer Regiment in 1939, after 5 years teaching elementary school. His diary, preserved in military archives, traces his evolution from civilian to soldier. Early entries express enthusiasm mixed with doubt. The physical training is beyond anything I imagined. 3 men in my platoon quit yesterday. I understand why, but cannot join them. Within months, the tone hardens. We are becoming something different from ordinary soldiers. The instructors emphasize that our enemies are not just military forces, but ideological threats to Germanic civilization. This reframing changes everything. By late 1939, Weidinger has fully internalized the SS worldview. I no longer think of myself as a teacher who became a soldier. I am a warrior who once taught school. His diary will continue through the war, documenting battles across Europe and the Soviet Union. Later entries reveal a man who committed and witnessed atrocities while maintaining absolute certainty in the righteousness of his cause. Weidinger survives the war, publishes memoirs in the 1980s, never expresses remorse. His transformation from schoolteacher to war criminal demonstrates how systematic indoctrination and military training can reshape identity entirely. The final inspection in April 1940 reveals what all this investment produced. Das Reich parades for Hitler and senior Wehrmacht commanders. The division's 19,000 men represent the culmination of 2 years' intensive preparation and enormous resource expenditure. Statistics tell part of the story. Casualty rate during training reached 8% versus Wehrmacht's 2% average. Equipment value per soldier exceeds 3 Wehrmacht infantry divisions combined. Training hours total over 4,000 per man, double the regular army standard. But numbers don't capture what observers notice in the soldiers themselves. An aggressive confidence bordering on arrogance, a unit cohesion that typically requires years of combat to develop, an eagerness for action that makes regular officers uncomfortable. Wehrmacht General Franz Halder notes in his diary, impressive display of training and equipment. Whether they can actually fight remains to be seen. My concern is they've been told they're invincible so often they might believe it. Halder's concern proves both justified and insufficient. Das Reich will fight very effectively. The problem isn't their combat performance, it's what they become in pursuit of military success. The ideological component of Das Reich's training distinguishes them from even elite Wehrmacht formations. Every soldier completes courses on racial science, the Eastern Question, and Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy theory. These aren't brief orientations but intensive programs spanning weeks. Training officers make explicit connections between ideology and military operations. A lecture on Soviet military organization segues into discussion of how Slavic racial characteristics produce predictable tactical behaviors. Instructions on anti-partisan warfare frame all civilians in occupied territory as potential threats who forfeit normal protections. The cumulative effect creates a worldview where political enemies and military opponents blur into single category. This cognitive fusion has tactical implications that training officers never explicitly address. Civilians can be legitimate targets, then the laws of war become suggestions rather than rules. If racial enemies threaten German existence, then normal mercy becomes racial suicide. Das Reich soldiers absorb these lessons thoroughly. They will apply them with deadly consistency across Europe and the Soviet Union. The Wehrmacht's relationship with Das Reich oscillates between admiration and resentment. Regular army commanders appreciate having a formation capable of executing difficult missions without extensive preparation. Das Reich's mobility and firepower provide operational flexibility that army headquarters often lacks. But the preferential treatment breeds bitterness. Infantry divisions that fought in Poland watch Das Reich receive equipment they desperately need. Panzer commanders who've proven themselves in combat see SS units get newer tanks. The ideological dimension adds another layer of friction. Wehrmacht officers pride themselves on professional competence separate from politics. They view SS ideological indoctrination as inappropriate contamination of military culture. Some, like Halder, worry that political reliability will be emphasized over tactical skill, producing formations that look impressive but collapse under pressure. These concerns will prove unfounded regarding combat effectiveness. Das Reich fights very well, but Wehrmacht fears about the corrupting influence of ideology mixing with military operations prove tragically accurate. The SS doctrine that political and military warfare are inseparable will produce not just effective combat formations, but effective killing machines directed at civilians. The psychological impact of the training regime deserves examination. Modern military psychology recognizes that dehumanizing enemy populations facilitates atrocity. Das Reich's training systematically accomplishes this dehumanization. Soviet soldiers are not brave defenders of their homeland, but Asiatic hordes controlled by Jewish commissars. Polish resistance fighters are not patriots but racial inferiors, incapable of self-governance. French civilians are not occupied populations with legitimate grievances, but weakened peoples whose defeat proves German superiority. This framework is reinforced daily through lectures, discussions, and informal officer guidance. Soldiers who question these characterizations face social ostracism or removal from the division. The combination of peer pressure and ideological saturation proves extraordinarily effective. Men who entered training with conventional moral frameworks emerge with radically altered worldviews. They have been taught to see warfare through racial lens where normal ethical constraints don't apply. This training doesn't merely prepare soldiers for combat, it prepares them to commit war crimes while maintaining self-image as honorable warriors. April 1940. Das Reich deploys toward the Western Front as part of German preparations for the invasion of France and the Low Countries. The division moves in massive columns, motorized units, stretching for miles along German roads. Civilians who watch them pass notice the difference from Wehrmacht formations. These soldiers look harder, move with greater purpose, carry themselves with aggressive confidence. The equipment gleams with maintenance. The formations maintain tight discipline even during road marches. Everything communicates readiness, competence, purpose. What civilians cannot see is the mindset these soldiers carry. They believe themselves part of a historic mission, racial warriors whose struggle transcends ordinary military conflict. They have been trained to see combat as proving ground for National Socialist ideology, where German superiority will be demonstrated through military victory. They expect to win because they believe they deserve to win, that racial destiny guarantees their success. This confidence is both their greatest strength and most dangerous weakness. It makes them formidable in battle, willing to take risks and absorb casualties. But it also makes them merciless toward anyone who resists German power, unable to accept that opposition might be legitimate rather than racial treachery. The training phase concludes with Das Reich positioned as Hitler's mobile reserve, ready to exploit breakthrough wherever German forces pierce Allied lines. 2 years of preparation reach culmination point. 19,000 men, equipped with best available weapons, trained to unprecedented intensity, indoctrinated with racial ideology that erases distinction between soldier and political warrior. They have been forged into a spearhead designed to shatter enemy formations and drive deep into Allied rear areas. The tactical doctrine emphasizes speed over security, exploitation over consolidation, aggressive initiative over careful planning. Everything about Das Reich reflects rejection of conservative military thinking in favor of bold action. Whether this approach succeeds depends on factors still unknown: enemy quality, terrain, logistics, chance. But the division's character is now fixed. The men who will fight across Europe have been shaped by training that made them simultaneously more effective as soldiers and more dangerous as human beings. The fusion of tactical excellence and ideological extremism is complete. Das Reich is ready for war. The world is not ready for Das Reich. May 13th, 1940. 3:45 in the morning. Hungary, France, The Meuse River flows dark and silent under scattered moonlight. German artillery has pounded the far bank for 6 hours, transforming French defensive positions into cratered moonscape. Now the barrage lifts, and Das Reich engineers push rubber boats into the current. They paddle frantically, expecting French machine guns to open fire at any moment. But the opposite bank remains quiet. The French 55th Infantry Division is exhausted, demoralized, caught during shift change, as morning and night crews overlap in confusion. Das Reich soldiers reach the far bank, establish small bridgehead, signal for follow-on forces. By 8 in the morning, the entire De Führer regiment has crossed. By noon, engineers complete a pontoon bridge capable of supporting armor. Das Reich is across the Meuse 4 hours ahead of schedule, exploiting French disorganization with ruthless efficiency. This is exactly what their training prepared them for: identifying weakness, attacking without hesitation, maintaining momentum regardless of risk. The crossing at Donchery becomes template for Das Reich's entire French campaign. They don't just fight well, they fight differently, treating audacity as doctrine rather than desperation. The German invasion of France begins on May 10th, with attacks through Belgium and the Netherlands. The Allied commanders expect this, having prepared defensive positions along traditional invasion routes. But the main German thrust comes through the Ardennes forest, terrain the French consider impassable for large armoured formations. 3 Panzer Corps drive through the forest roads, including Das Reich as part of the second wave. The advance quickly becomes chaotic. Narrow roads force vehicles into single file, Belgian refugees fleeing westward clog routes, mixing with military columns in nightmarish confusion. Das Reich soldiers experience their first combat as traffic jam punctuated by occasional air attacks. But once through the Ardennes, the division encounters the Meuse River line, France's primary defensive barrier. Wehrmacht doctrine calls for careful preparation before river crossings, extensive reconnaissance artillery concentration, engineers preparing crossing sites. Das Reich ignores this methodology. Their reconnaissance battalion reaches the Meuse on May 12, immediately scouts crossing points, reports findings directly to regimental commanders, who order immediate attack. This aggressive tempo catches French defenders unprepared. The tactical innovation Das Reich demonstrates at the Meuse influences German doctrine for the rest of the war. Traditional river crossing operations are methodical, secure near bank, suppress far bank, establish bridgehead, consolidate before advancing. Das Reich compresses this timeline dramatically. Their engineers cross under fire, accepting casualties to save time. Infantry follows immediately, rather than waiting for secure bridgehead. Artillery displaces forward constantly, accepting vulnerability to provide close support. The entire division operates inside French decision cycle, acting faster than defenders can react. French commanders attempting to organize counterattacks find Das Reich has already advanced beyond reported positions. Communication failures compound as German forces penetrate faster than French staff can update situation maps. Das Reich covers 40 miles in the 3 days following the Meuse crossing, an advance rate that seems impossible given French defensive preparations. But speed itself becomes their weapon. French units prepared to fight methodical defensive battles collapse when faced with tempo that allows no time to adapt. May 17th. The town of Rethel, northeastern France. Das Reich Reconnaissance Battalion enters a military vacuum, the gap between French armies retreating in different directions. The battalion commander, Sturmbannführer Heinz Harmel, makes decision that epitomizes Das Reich's aggressive doctrine. Rather than waiting for the division's main body, He orders his 800 men to continue advancing independently. For 36 hours, the reconnaissance battalion operates 85 miles ahead of nearest German forces, racing through French rear areas, capturing supplies, destroying communications infrastructure, spreading panic. They cover territory that French defenders believe is secure, appearing in towns that had no warning of German approach. The risk is enormous. If concentrated French forces locate the isolated battalion, they could be destroyed. But Hamel gambles that speed provides protection, that staying ahead of French information networks makes his force invisible. The gamble succeeds. The reconnaissance battalion rejoins Das Reich on May 19th, having suffered minimal casualties while disrupting entire French corps area. Wehrmacht observers described the action as tactically unsound but operationally brilliant. Das Reich has demonstrated that conventional military caution sometimes costs more than it saves. But May 21st brings Das Reich its first serious tactical crisis. Near Arras, British tank forces launch counterattack against German flanks. The British bring Matilda infantry tanks, heavily armoured vehicles nearly immune to standard German anti-tank guns. Das Reich suddenly faces enemy superior in protection, if not numbers. The Matilda tanks punch through Das Reich screening positions, overrun an artillery battery, threaten division headquarters. For 2 hours, outcome hangs uncertain. Das Reich anti-tank guns fire repeatedly at Matilda frontal armour, rounds bouncing off without effect. Panic begins spreading through forward units, facing seemingly invulnerable opponents. Division headquarters requests immediate Luftwaffe support. Stuka dive bombers arrive within 30 minutes, attacking British tanks with 500-pound bombs. The intervention stabilizes the situation, allows Das Reich to reorganize and counterattack. By evening, British forces withdraw, having suffered heavy losses. Das Reich counts its own casualties, 200 killed, 300 wounded, substantial equipment losses. The Arras counterattack reveals that aggressive tactics have limits. Against prepared opponents with superior equipment, Das Reich's speed and initiative aren't sufficient. They need support from other arms, particularly air power. This lesson will be forgotten and relearned painfully in future campaigns. The massacre at Wytschaete on May 28 introduces a pattern that follows Das Reich throughout the war. The Deutschland Regiment captures British positions held by the Royal Warwickshire Regiment. Most British soldiers surrender after ammunition exhaustion. Das Reich troops march, the prisoners rearward in column toward temporary POW cages. According to British survivors and German witnesses, SS guards suddenly open fire on the unarmed prisoners without warning or provocation. 85 British soldiers die in minutes. Some attempt to flee, are shot down while running. Others raise hands pleading for mercy, are killed where they stand. The shooting stops as abruptly as it began. Das Reich soldiers continue marching surviving prisoners rearward as if nothing happened. Wehrmacht artillery observers witness the massacre from nearby positions. Several file official reports documenting what they saw. The reports move up army chain of command, creating documentary record that will later prove crucial in war crimes investigations. But in May 1940, no action results. Wehrmacht High Command treats the incident as regrettable excess during fast-moving operations. Das Reich officers face no punishment. The soldiers who performed the killings receive no discipline. The implicit message, such actions may be frowned upon officially, but carry no real consequences. The tactical tempo continues through June. Das Reich participates in the reduction of the Dunkirk pocket, though they arrive after most British forces evacuate. They swing south toward Paris. racing ahead of Wehrmacht infantry divisions who struggle to keep pace. June 12th, the town of Tarare, 50 miles southwest of Lyon. Das Reich's reconnaissance battalion discovers a massive French fuel depot, abandoned by retreating forces but largely intact. 300,000 gallons of gasoline sit in storage tanks, enough to fuel the division for weeks. The capture of this depot illustrates both the chaos of French collapse and Das Reich's ability to exploit opportunity. French logisticians fled without destroying their supplies, assuming German forces remained far to the north. Das Reich's rapid advance caught them completely by surprise. The captured fuel enables continued operations without waiting for German supply columns to catch up. This kind of opportunistic seizure of enemy resources becomes Das Reich trademark. They move so fast they live off enemy supplies, capturing food, fuel, and ammunition faster than their own logistics can deliver it. By mid-June, organized French resistance collapses. Das Reich transitions from combat operations to occupation duties, establishing control over captured territory in eastern France. The contrast between their combat performance and occupation behavior reveals Das Reich's dual nature. As combat soldiers, they demonstrate tactical excellence. 500 miles advanced in 30 days, 8,000 prisoners captured, 1,200 casualties suffered, representing 6% casualty rate. These statistics compare favorably to any Wehrmacht formation. Grossdeutschland Division, considered the Army's elite unit, covered same distance in 42 days, with similar losses. Das Reich proved their training and equipment advantages translate into superior battlefield performance. But simultaneously, the pattern of atrocities establishes itself. The Wytschaete massacre wasn't an isolated incident. Das Reich soldiers repeatedly respond to any resistance, real or imagined, with disproportionate violence against prisoners and civilians. French civilians in occupied areas learn to avoid Das Reich troops, sensing danger even when no specific threat exists. The post-campaign analysis by Wehrmacht High Command produces contradictory assessments. Tactical reports praise Das Reich's aggressive initiative and rapid exploitation of success. General Heinz Guderian, whose panzer forces Das Reich supported, writes the SSVT division, Das Reich demonstrated outstanding combat effectiveness. Their willingness to accept risk enabled operations that conventional forces would have considered impossible. But other reports note concerning patterns. French civilian complaints about Das Reich's behavior significantly exceed those against Wehrmacht units operating in same areas. The British government formally protests the Wytschaete massacre, demanding punishment of responsible individuals. Wehrmacht Judge Advocate General opens investigation, but quietly closes it weeks later without charges. The contradiction becomes institutionalized. Das Reich is simultaneously celebrated for tactical achievements and protected from consequences of criminal behavior. This dual standard will persist throughout the war, allowing the division to maintain reputation as elite formation while committing systematic atrocities. Individual soldiers' letters home reveal how they process the French campaign. Many express pride in their performance, vindication that intense training produced superior results. One private writes to his family, "We have proven what the Führer believed, that committed National Socialists make better soldiers than professional mercenaries. The French fought without conviction. We fought for destiny." The ideological framework that training instilled shapes how Das Reich soldiers interpret their experiences. They don't see themselves merely defeating French military forces. They view the campaign as proving racial superiority, demonstrating that Germanic warriors naturally dominate inferior peoples. This interpretation has dangerous implications. If victory proves racial ideology correct, then opposition must stem from racial weakness or Jewish conspiracy. This logic eliminates possibility of legitimate resistance, transforming all opponents into racial enemies whose destruction becomes not just militarily necessary, but ideologically mandated. The French campaign thus reinforces rather than moderates Das Reich's ideological extremism. June 20th, 1940. Armistice signed at Compiègne. German victory is complete and France exits the war. Das Reich relocates to southwestern France for occupation duties and rest. The soldiers who fought through May and June are no longer untested recruits. They have experienced combat, proven their tactics work, bonded through shared danger. The division's cohesion strengthens as veterans absorb lessons and reinforce effective behaviors. But the French campaign has also normalized violence against non-combatants in ways that will metastasize later. Officers who might have stopped the Wytschaete massacre saw no consequences follow. Soldiers who participated in summary executions learned that such actions are tacitly approved despite official prohibitions. The Wehrmacht's decision to protect Das Reich from accountability sends clear signal SS formations operate under different rules. This special status will prove catastrophic once Das Reich deploys to Eastern Front, where ideological warfare erases remaining restraints. The innovation Das Reich introduces during the French campaign influences armored warfare doctrine throughout World War II and beyond. Their practice of reconnaissance in force, sending entire battalions ahead of main body to locate and exploit weaknesses, becomes standard panzer procedure. Their emphasis on radio communication, enabling decentralized decision-making, shapes post-war military organization. Their demonstration that aggressive tempo can substitute for numerical superiority informs operational planning across multiple armies. Military historians studying the 1940 campaign identify Das Reich as among the most tactically innovative formations in the Wehrmacht SS force structure. Professional military education still analyzes their operations, extracting lessons about mobile warfare and combined arms coordination. Confront the uncomfortable reality that this same formation committed war crimes during its first campaign. The Wytschaete massacre isn't tangential to Das Reich's story. It happens during the same period as their celebrated tactical achievements, performed by the same soldiers, under command of the same officers. Military effectiveness and criminal conduct aren't separate phenomena in Das Reich's case. They emerge from the same organizational culture, reinforced by the same training, protected by the same institutional structures. The strategic implications of Das Reich's performance extend beyond the French campaign's immediate results. Hitler draws sweeping conclusions from SS formation's battlefield success. He sees vindication of his belief that ideological commitment enhances rather than impairs military effectiveness. He orders expansion of Waffen-SS from 3 divisions in 1940 to 38 divisions by 1945. Das Reich serves as template for this expansion, with new formations trained according to methods Das Reich pioneered. This decision has far-reaching consequences. The massive expansion of Waffen-SS creates parallel military structure rivaling Wehrmacht in size and consuming resources the regular army desperately needs. It also spreads Das Reich's toxic combination of tactical aggression and ideological extremism across dozens of formations. The atrocity patterns Das Reich established in France will be replicated by other SS divisions across Europe and the Soviet Union. In this sense, Das Reich's June 1940 success contains seeds of catastrophe extending far beyond the division itself. By late June, Das Reich settles into occupation routine in southern France. Training resumes immediately. Officers identify tactical deficiencies observed during combat. Infantry armor coordination needs improvement. Artillery forward observers require better radio equipment. Anti-tank capabilities proved insufficient against heavier enemy armor. The division that emerged from France is more experienced, but also more confident, perhaps overconfident. They faced weak opposition in crisis, and prevailed easily. Whether they can perform against determined, prepared enemies remains untested. Some Wehrmacht observers warn that Das Reich's tactics work best against confused, retreating opponents. What happens when they face enemies who won't retreat, who trade space for time, who accept casualties to slow German advance? These questions will be answered in the Soviet Union. The answers will shatter Das Reich's aura of invincibility and transform the division from aggressive assault force into instrument of genocide. But in June 1940, victory seems to validate everything: the training, the tactics, the ideology. Das Reich has proven itself in combat. France has proven an excellent laboratory. The real test awaits in the East. June 22nd, 1941. 3:15 in the morning. The Bug River, Soviet-German border. Darkness erupts with simultaneous violence along 800 miles of frontier. 3 million German soldiers surge eastward in the largest invasion in human history. Das Reich crosses the Bug River in the first wave, their half-tracks and trucks creating columns of light through the pre-dawn gloom. Soviet border guards, caught completely by surprise, despite weeks of warning signs, mount confused resistance before being overwhelmed. Within the first hour, Das Reich advances 5 miles. Within 6 hours, 15 miles. The speed seems to validate every assumption about Soviet weakness and German superiority. But already in these opening hours, something darker unfolds. As Das Reich overruns Soviet positions, they discover NKVD border stations with documents being frantically burned. Political officers attempt to flee. Das Reich soldiers shoot them without hesitation. 180 executions before sunrise. No written orders exist authorizing these killings. No after-action reports mention them. The murders happen with casual efficiency, as if this is understood procedure. The ideological indoctrination that preceded military training has achieved its purpose. These soldiers do not distinguish between armed combatants and political enemies. Operation Barbarossa is hours old, and Das Reich has already begun the fusion of military operations and ideological extermination that will define their Eastern Front experience. The initial Soviet collapse exceeds German expectations. Stalin's purges of the Red Army in the late 1930s decimated officer corps, leaving Soviet forces led by politically reliable incompetents. Soviet defensive deployments are disastrous. Forward units, positioned to invade rather than defend, caught strung out and vulnerable when Germans attack. Das Reich exploits this chaos ruthlessly. Their reconnaissance battalion races ahead, covering 50 miles on the first day, leaving Soviet headquarters units confused about where German spearheads actually are. The main body follows, encircling isolated Soviet formations, bypassing strong points, maintaining relentless eastward pressure. By June 25th, Das Reich has advanced 100 miles, captured thousands of prisoners, suffered relatively light casualties. The officers who fought in France recognize familiar pattern: speed disrupts enemy command and control, aggressive exploitation prevents defensive consolidation, audacity substitutes for numerical superiority. But Soviet Union is not France. The distances are incomprehensible, the population hostile, the climate unforgiving, and Soviet forces, despite catastrophic losses, Keep fighting even when surrounded. German intelligence predicted Soviet collapse within 8 weeks. Das Reich soldiers begin suspecting this timeline might be optimistic. July 10, 1941. The Yelnya salient, 200 miles inside Soviet territory. Das Reich captures strategically vital ground overlooking approaches to Moscow. The salient represents a penetration into Soviet lines, valuable for future offensive operations but vulnerable to counterattack from 3 sides. Soviet command recognizes the threat and responds with immediate counteroffensive. For 42 days, Das Reich holds the salient against 7 major Soviet attacks. The fighting is unlike anything the division experienced in France. Soviet infantry attacks in waves, accepting horrific casualties to close with German positions. Soviet artillery fires barrages that dwarf anything Western Front produced. Das Reich soldiers experience their first taste of Soviet determination. Enemies who fight to encirclement rather than surrender, wounded who detonate grenades when Germans approach, commissars who shoot their own retreating soldiers to maintain attack momentum. Das Reich holds the salient, but the cost is staggering. Daily casualties reach levels that would cause most units to collapse. Company strengths drop from 150 men to 70, then 50, then 30. Yet the division maintains cohesion, feeding in replacement units, rotating exhausted battalions, holding ground through sheer willpower. August 4, 1941. The village of Elnya, Belarus. The prolonged defense of the salient has stretched Das Reich to breaking point. Ammunition runs low. Food supplies become irregular. Casualties mount daily. Then partisans strike a supply column, killing 6 Das Reich soldiers in ambush. The division's response is immediate and disproportionate. Deutschland Regiment surrounds Elnya village, herds 320 civilians into the main square, and executes them. 87 are children. The justification in the after-action report claims the villagers were partisan supporters, but presents no evidence of individual guilt. No trial occurs. No investigation precedes the massacre. The killing is collective punishment, retaliation for partisan action visited upon whoever is available. Wehrmacht General Heinz Guderian visits Das Reich command post days later. Notes in his diary, excellent tactical soldiers, but methods concerning. He does not elaborate. He does not intervene. The Elnya massacre establishes pattern that will repeat across the Eastern Front. Military frustration transforms into violence against civilians, with ideology providing justification and command structure, providing protection from consequences. The Eastern Front reveals limitations in Das Reich's tactical doctrine. The aggressive tempo that worked brilliantly in France falters against Soviet strategic depth. Das Reich can win individual battles but cannot achieve decisive victory because Soviet forces simply retreat deeper into vast territory, trading space for time. The division's motorization, such an advantage in Western Europe's road networks, becomes liability on primitive Soviet infrastructure. Vehicles break down on dirt tracks that turn to mud pits in rain. Spare parts become unavailable as supply lines stretch hundreds of miles. By August, Das Reich is losing more vehicles to mechanical failure than enemy action. The soldiers themselves deteriorate under conditions they never trained for. Summer heat reaches over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Dust coats everything, infiltrating weapons and causing malfunctions. Water sources are contaminated or non-existent. Disease spreads through units, dysentery, typhus, infections from untreated wounds. The division that crossed the Bug River in June is physically and mentally exhausted by September. September 2nd, 1941. Das Reich receives orders to evacuate the Yelnya salient. After holding the position for nearly 2 months at enormous cost, the division retreats. This marks the first time Das Reich has voluntarily abandoned territory since formation. The psychological impact on soldiers is profound. They have been taught they are invincible, that Germanic warriors naturally dominate inferior Slavic peoples. Yet they are retreating, yielding ground bought with blood, unable to achieve objectives despite tactical superiority. The cognitive dissonance produces dangerous mental framework. If Das Reich is superior but struggling, the explanation must be that enemies are fighting unfairly, using Jewish Bolshevik treachery rather than honest military opposition. This logic transforms Soviet resistance from legitimate defense into racial conspiracy. It makes every Soviet soldier a participant in Jewish plot, every civilian a potential partisan, every setback evidence of enemy inhumanity rather than German limitation. The ideological indoctrination that made Das Reich effective in combat now warps their perception of reality itself. The Commissar Order and other ideological directives shape Das Reich's behavior systematically. Hitler's Commissar Order, issued before Barbarossa begins, demands immediate execution of all captured Soviet political officers without trial. Wehrmacht units implement this order inconsistently, some complying, others quietly ignoring it. Das Reich implements it enthusiastically. Division intelligence sections maintain execution statistics, reporting them to Berlin as evidence of ideological reliability. By December 1941, Das Reich has executed over 800 Soviet commissars and political officers. This compares to 40 executions by Wehrmacht's 18th Army operating in same sector. The disparity reveals that Das Reich interprets orders through ideological lens that emphasizes killing over military necessity. Soviet commissars are legitimate military targets under the Commissar Order, but Das Reich's execution rate suggests they are hunting political officers rather than simply shooting those encountered in combat. The division is conducting ideological warfare alongside military operations, targeting Soviet political structure for destruction, independent of tactical considerations. October through November 1941. Das Reich participates in Operation Typhoon, the final German offensive toward Moscow. The autumn weather transforms roads into quagmires. Vehicles bog down axle-deep in mud that seems bottomless. Soldiers march through slurry that sucks boots off feet. The offensive slows, then stalls, then grinds forward meter by meter. Das Reich reaches positions 30 miles from Moscow, close enough that some soldiers claim they can see the Kremlin's lights on clear nights. But they cannot advance further. Soviet reinforcements arrive from Siberia, fresh divisions equipped for winter warfare. The temperature drops, -10 degrees Fahrenheit, -20, -30. Das Reich soldiers are not equipped for this cold. They wear standard uniforms with inadequate winter clothing. Weapons freeze and malfunction. Vehicle engines seize. Frostbite casualties exceed combat casualties. Men huddle in foxholes that provide no warmth, burning whatever fuel they can scavenge, slowly freezing. The division that prided itself on aggressive mobile warfare becomes immobile, frozen into defensive positions, unable to attack or retreat. December 5, 1941. Soviet counteroffensive smashes into German lines around Moscow. Fresh Soviet armies, equipped with winter gear and supported by T-34 tanks, attack across the entire front. Das Reich, holding positions with depleted battalions at 20% strength, faces overwhelming assault. The defensive battle is desperate. Soviet infantry attacks through snowstorms, appearing out of white void at point-blank range. Das Reich soldiers, many suffering frostbite and exhaustion, fight with dwindling ammunition and failing weapons. Command structure begins fragmenting as communication lines freeze and radios fail. Individual companies and platoons fight isolated actions, uncertain whether neighboring units still exist. By December 8th, the situation becomes untenable. Das Reich receives authorization to retreat, the first general withdrawal order since invasion began. The retreat quickly degenerates into rout. Units abandon heavy equipment that cannot be moved. The division loses 186 vehicles in 3 days, most to mechanical failure and abandonment rather than enemy action. Soldiers stumble rearward through snow, discarding equipment to maintain speed, focused only on escaping Soviet pursuit. The human cost of the first 6 months on the Eastern Front shatters Das Reich as combat formation. The division began Operation Barbarossa with 19,000 men. By December 31st, 11,400 are casualties killed, wounded, missing, or incapacitated by frostbite and disease. This represents 60% losses, a casualty rate that would destroy most military formations' combat effectiveness. Das Reich maintains minimal cohesion only because veteran survivors provide leadership framework around which replacement troops can organize. But these survivors are not the confident soldiers who crossed the Bug River in June. They have experienced defeat, retreat, and conditions that revealed German military supremacy as myth rather than reality. The psychological impact manifests in deteriorating discipline and increasing brutality towards civilians. Units retreating through Soviet villages burn them systematically, killing inhabitants and destroying food supplies. The justification is military, denying resources to pursuing Soviets. The reality is vengeance, punishing civilians for German failure. Officers make minimal effort to restrain these actions, recognizing that their men need outlet for rage and frustration. The ideological reports Das Reich files with SS headquarters reveal how the division frames its Eastern Front experience. Rather than acknowledging tactical limitations or Soviet military competence, reports emphasize Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy and racial struggle. Division intelligence officer files weekly assessments describing Soviet resistance as evidence of Jewish control over Slavic masses. Civilian populations are characterized as inherently hostile, requiring preemptive violence to ensure German security. These reports serve multiple purposes. They justify Das Reich's atrocities to superiors in Berlin. They reinforce ideological worldview among division officers, and they create documentary trail that will later prove crucial in war crimes prosecutions. Evidence that Das Reich's criminal conduct was systematic and approved at command level, rather than isolated actions by rogue soldiers. The reports also reveal cognitive dissonance at division's core. How can Soviets be racially inferior yet fighting so effectively? The answer: Das Reich embraces Soviet success proves Jewish manipulation rather than Slavic capability. This explanation preserves ideological framework while acknowledging battlefield reality. December turns to January 1942. Das Reich withdraws to positions west of Moscow, establishes defensive line, begins receiving replacement troops and equipment. The winter campaign has been catastrophic failure. Operation Barbarossa aimed to destroy Soviet Union in single campaign season. Instead, Wehrmacht is locked in attritional struggle against enemy that refuses to collapse. Das Reich's specific experience, microcosms, The larger German failure. The division's tactical excellence proved insufficient against strategic depth, climate, and Soviet determination. Their aggressive doctrine, so successful in France, produced heavy casualties without decisive results in Russia. Their ideological extremism, rather than enhancing combat effectiveness, led them into war crimes that diverted resources and attention from military objectives. The division that emerges from the winter of 1941 is broken, physically and psychologically damaged, facing reconstitution that will take months. But the pattern is now established. Das Reich will fight with tactical skill while committing systematic atrocities, blame setbacks on enemy treachery rather than German limitations, and receive protection from consequences due to their status as elite SS formation. The Soviet civilian experience of Das Reich occupation leaves scars that persist generations later. In villages where Das Reich operated, survivors recount consistent pattern: initial violence during capture, followed by systematic exploitation, punctuated by massacres in response to partisan activity or military setbacks. Das Reich soldiers requisition food that leaves civilians starving. They burn villages when retreating to deny shelter to Soviet forces. They execute civilians on suspicion of partisan connections without evidence or trial. The violence is not random but systematic, implemented consistently across different regiments and battalions, suggesting command-level approval or encouragement. Soviet archives contain thousands of witness statements describing Das Reich atrocities during 1941. These statements, collected during war and post-war investigations, provide detailed documentation of specific incidents, naming SS officers, and identifying division insignia. The cumulative evidence reveals that Das Reich's criminality on Eastern Front was not aberration, but standard operating procedure. Violence so routine it barely warranted mention in German after-action reports. The contrast between Das Reich's combat performance and occupation behavior illuminates fundamental contradiction in German military culture. German tactical doctrine emphasized operational excellence, thorough planning, efficient execution, adaptation to battlefield conditions. This professional approach produced remarkable military achievements. Das Reich's advances during Barbarossa's opening phase demonstrated superb tactical skill. Their defense of Yelnya salient showed tenacity under pressure. Their ability to maintain cohesion despite 60% casualties reflected excellent training and leadership. Yet this same organization committed massacres with bureaucratic efficiency, documented their crimes in official reports, and faced no internal accountability. The German military, both Wehrmacht and SS, never resolved this contradiction. Wanted credit for tactical achievements while denying responsibility for criminal conduct. They celebrated aggressive initiative in combat while refusing to acknowledge that same mentality produced atrocities when applied to civilians. Das Reich exemplifies this moral bankruptcy perfectly. They were superb soldiers and enthusiastic war criminals. Both identities were real. Neither cancelled the other. By late January 1942, Das Reich begins withdrawing from front lines for reconstitution in occupied France. The division that leaves the Eastern Front bears little resemblance to the formation that invaded 6 months earlier. Of 19,000 men who began Barbarossa, fewer than 8,000 remain with the division. Equipment losses approach 50%. The survivors are physically wasted from malnutrition and exposure, psychologically traumatized by months of combat and defeat. But they have also become something different from the soldiers who trained in Bavaria. They have killed on industrial scale combatants and civilians alike, without remorse or consequence. They have internalized the lesson that their lives matter more than enemy lives. that achieving military objectives justifies any level of violence, that retreat or setback demands vengeance against available victims. The ideological training they received at Bad Tölz has been reinforced by battlefield experience. They entered Russia as believers in racial ideology. They leave as practitioners of it, men who have translated abstract hate into concrete atrocity. Das Reich's transformation from elite assault division into killing machine is complete. The reconstitution in France will repair their physical damage and restore combat capability, but the moral damage is permanent and irreparable. March 15th, 1942. Fontainebleau, France. Train cars roll through the quiet French countryside, carrying what remains of Das Reich division. Local French civilians watch from distance, noting the soldiers who detach from the trains and form into columns. These men look nothing like the confident troops who occupied France 2 years earlier. They move slowly, many limping, faces gaunt from malnutrition and exposure. Their uniforms hang loose on frames that lost 30 or 40 pounds during the Russian winter. Equipment is mismatched, cobbled together from whatever remained after the retreat from Moscow. French resistance observers counting the detrained soldiers estimate perhaps 7,000 men, less than half the division's authorized strength. Wehrmacht medical officers examining Das Reich personnel describe them as broken men, physically and psychologically exhausted, requiring months of recovery before return to combat readiness. But Hitler has different plans. Das Reich will not merely recover. They will be transformed into something more lethal. A panzer division, equipped with heavy tanks and reorganized for armored warfare. The transformation begins immediately, even as soldiers still recovering from frostbite begin training on tanks they have never seen before. The decision to convert Das Reich into a panzer division reflects both strategic necessity and ideological preference. German losses on the Eastern Front during winter 1941 through 42 approached 700,000 men, a hemorrhage that Wehrmacht cannot sustain. Mobile armored formations capable of decisive breakthrough operations become critically important as German strategy shifts from conquest to consolidation. Hitler wants more panzer divisions, but Wehrmacht is already stretched thin, organizing new armored formations. The Waffen-SS offers solution: convert existing SS divisions into panzer formations, leveraging their aggressive tactical culture and ideological reliability. Das Reich is obvious choice for conversion. Despite catastrophic losses in Russia, the division maintained better cohesion under pressure than many Wehrmacht units. Their officer corps, though depleted, retained experienced leaders who understood mobile warfare. And critically, Das Reich soldiers demonstrated willingness to continue fighting under conditions that broke other formations. The conversion is gamble. Transforming infantry into armor crews typically requires year-long training cycle. Das Reich has 4 months before scheduled return to Eastern Front. May 1942. Grafenwehr Training Ground, Bavaria. Das Reich receives its first Tiger tanks, 9 of the massive 60-ton vehicles fresh from production. The Tigers represent cutting edge of German tank design, 88mm main gun capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, armor thick enough to defeat most anti-tank weapons. But the Tigers are also mechanically complex, prone to breakdown, and require extensive crew training to operate effectively. Das Reich tank crews, many of whom have never operated armored vehicles before, must master these temperamental machines in weeks rather than months. Training proceeds 16 hours daily, combining classroom instruction on mechanical systems with practical exercises on gunnery ranges. The casualty rate during training shocks even veterans of Russian winter, 14 men killed in training accidents, mostly from mechanical failures or gunnery mishaps. This represents higher training fatality rate than any Wehrmacht Panzer Division experiences. But the accelerated timeline allows no accommodation for safety concerns. Das Reich must be combat-ready by autumn. The reorganization transforms Das Reich's structure fundamentally. The 3 motorized infantry regiments are reduced to 2 Panzergrenadier regiments, Der Führer and Deutschland. These retain motorized infantry role, but with heavier weapons and close integration with armor. Langemarck regiment is disbanded, its personnel distributed to other units or transferred to different SS divisions. The new Panzer Regiment becomes Division's striking arm, organized into 2 battalions totaling 145 tanks, 9 Tigers, 104 Panzer IVs with long 75mm guns, and 32 Panzer II IS. This represents more armoured firepower than most Wehrmacht divisions possess. The reconnaissance battalion expands, receiving additional half-tracks and armoured cars. The artillery regiment re-equips with self-propelled guns, capable of keeping pace with armour. The engineer battalion receives assault guns and bridging equipment. The cumulative effect creates formation fundamentally different from infantry division that invaded Russia. Das Reich is now designed for breakthrough operations, punching through enemy lines and exploiting deep into rear areas. The Tiger tanks generate both excitement and concern among Das Reich crews. The Tiger's firepower is devastating. During gunnery training, crews watch 88mm rounds punch through target armor at ranges where enemy tanks cannot effectively return fire. The thick frontal armor provides confidence that Western Front tank combat mostly lacked, but the Tigers are mechanically unreliable nightmares. The Maybach engine is overstressed, powering 60-ton vehicle, leading to frequent breakdowns. The interleaved roadwheel system, designed to distribute weight, traps mud and freezes solid in cold weather. Fuel consumption is prodigious. The Tiger covers barely 1 kilometer per 100 liters of gasoline, making logistics a constant challenge. Crews quickly learn that Tigers are most dangerous to enemy when stationary, using their superior gun and armor defensively. Offensive operations risk mechanical breakdown that leaves expensive tanks stranded deep in enemy territory. This limitation shapes how Das Reich employs Tigers throughout the war, as mobile pillboxes that anchor defensive positions or support attacks, rather than leading them. Hauptsturmführer Helmut Schreiber's personal story illustrates the psychological impact of Das Reich's transformation. Before Russia, Schreiber led an infantry platoon in the Der Führer regiment, earning Iron Cross during French campaign and Knight's Cross at Yelnya Salient. He survived the winter of 1941 with severe frostbite that cost him 3 toes. Now he commands a Panzer IV in the newly formed tank regiment. His letters to his wife reveal complex emotions about the transition. "The Panzer restores what Russia took from us," he writes in June 1942. "Inside this steel beast, I feel invincible again. The terror of Soviet winter cannot reach me here." But other letters reveal darker thoughts. He describes nightmares about villages burning, civilians screaming, the casual executions that became routine during retreat from Moscow. The Panzer becomes more than weapon for Schreiber. It represents psychological armor, protection not just from enemy fire, but from memories he cannot process. This pattern repeats across Das Reich. Veterans of the Russian winter embrace their new tanks, not merely as military equipment, but as shields against trauma they lack language to articulate. July 1942. The reconstituted Das Reich conducts division-level exercises combining all combat arms. The training demonstrates both progress and persistent problems. The positive, Das Reich's armor and infantry coordinate effectively, with Panzer Grenadiers supporting tank advances and tanks providing fire support for infantry assaults. Radio communication, always a Das Reich strength, allows rapid coordination across scattered units. The aggressive tactical culture that served them in France remains intact despite Russian losses. Commanders at all levels demonstrate initiative, making decisions without waiting for higher authorization. The negative mechanical reliability plagues operations. During one 72-hour exercise, 30% of tanks break down and require repair. The Tigers are particularly troublesome, with 6 of 9 becoming non-operational due to transmission failures. Supply chains struggle to keep pace with fuel consumption. Infantry-tank coordination, while improving, still shows dangerous gaps where units lose contact and coordination fails. Wehrmacht observers filing reports note that Das Reich possesses excellent potential, but requires more training time than available. The personnel replacement process creates new divisions within the division. Of 7,000 survivors who returned from Russia, perhaps 4,000 remain with SS Reich after medical discharges and transfers. The division absorbs 11,000 replacement troops to reach authorized strength of 20,000 men. These replacements fall into 3 categories. First, young recruits fresh from SS training schools, ideologically indoctrinated but combat inexperienced. Second, Wehrmacht soldiers transferring to Waffen-SS, often motivated by better equipment and promotion opportunities rather than ideological commitment. Third, ethnic Germans from occupied territories, particularly Romania and Hungary, meeting SS racial criteria, but often speaking limited German. The resulting formation is hodgepodge of veterans, believers, opportunists, and conscripts. The Russian winter veterans form aristocracy within this hierarchy, their experience commanding respect regardless of rank. They tell stories about Eastern Front that simultaneously terrify and fascinate the replacements, the cold, the casualties, the ruthlessness required to survive. But these veterans also transmit darker lessons that killing civilians is acceptable, that retreating enemies deserve no mercy, that ideology justifies any action. The technical innovation Das Reich tests during reconstitution influences German armor development. The division receives early versions of Scherzensied armor, thin plates designed to detonate shaped charge warheads before they reach tanks' main armor. Das Reich crews test these plates under various conditions, providing feedback that shapes final design. They experiment with different tank camouflage patterns, determining which schemes provide best concealment in different terrain. They pioneer combined arms tactics integrating Tiger's long-range firepower with Panzer IV's mobility and infantry's close-quarters capability. Some innovations prove valuable and spread across panzer forces. Others fail and are discarded. But the process reveals Das Reich's continued role as testing ground for German tactical development. The division's aggressive culture makes them willing to try unconventional approaches that conservative Wehrmacht units avoid. This experimentation sometimes produces breakthroughs. It also produces casualties when experiments fail during combat rather than training. November 1942. Das Reich is officially redesignated 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. The ceremony marking the conversion involves division passing in review before Heinrich Himmler and senior SS leadership. Himmler's speech emphasizes that Das Reich represents future of Waffen-SS, ideologically pure warriors equipped with modern weapons, capable of independent operations, loyal only to Führer and National Socialist ideology. The division now numbers 20,000 men organized into 2 Panzer Grenadier regiments, 1 Panzer regiment, 1 artillery regiment, plus reconnaissance, anti-aircraft, engineer and support battalions. On paper, Das Reich possesses combat power equivalent to 3 Wehrmacht infantry divisions. The equipment inventory is impressive: 145 tanks, 35 assault guns, 72 artillery pieces, over 2,000 vehicles. The cost of this single division equals 3 Wehrmacht infantry divisions, or 5 Luftwaffe field divisions. The investment reflects Hitler's confidence that elite armored formations can compensate for Germany's declining strategic position. Whether Das Reich can deliver decisive results sufficient to justify this investment remains to be determined. The veteran retention rate surprises Wehrmacht analysts studying SS divisions. Despite suffering 60% casualties in Russia, 72% of Das Reich survivors volunteer to remain with the division rather than transfer to easier assignments. This retention rate significantly exceeds Wehrmacht averages, where Russian winter veterans typically seek any opportunity to avoid Eastern Front return. Several factors explain Das Reich's cohesion. First, the division's elite identity creates powerful group loyalty. Soldiers identify as Das Reich men, viewing their unit affiliation as core identity. Second, the survivors share traumatic experiences that bond them together, while separating them from soldiers who didn't experience Russian winter. Third, Das Reich's preferential equipment and supply treatment provides tangible benefits that soldiers recognize and value. Fourth, and most darkly, Das Reich's criminal conduct creates complicity that binds members together. Soldiers who participated in or witnessed atrocities know they face potential prosecution if Germany loses the war. Remaining with the division, among men who share collective guilt, feels safer than transferring to units where their actions might become subject of judgment. The conversion period in France allows Das Reich limited interaction with occupied populations, interactions that reveal persistent behavioral problems. French civilians complain about Das Reich soldiers requisitioning property, intimidating locals, and responding to resistance activity with disproportionate violence. In several incidents, German military police investigating civilian complaints discovered Das Reich personnel used excessive force in situations that Wehrmacht protocols would handle differently. But SS command structure protects Das Reich from meaningful consequences. Complaints filed with Wehrmacht authorities are transferred to SS jurisdiction, where they disappear into administrative limbo. The pattern established in Russia continues. Das Reich operates under different rules, enjoying elite status that exempts them from normal accountability. This special treatment reinforces division's self-image as warriors above ordinary law. The ideological framework that justified civilian massacres in Soviet Union remains intact, merely dormant, until next Eastern Front deployment. The training accidents that kill 14 men during Panzer conversion receive minimal attention outside the division. Military training always involves risk, and 14 deaths across 8 months might seem acceptable, given the intensive preparation schedule. But the casualty pattern reveals concerning trends. Most deaths result from live-fire exercises, where safety protocols are deliberately minimized to create realistic combat conditions. Das Reich training philosophy emphasizes that soldiers must experience genuine danger to develop proper battlefield instincts. This approach produces undeniably aggressive soldiers, but at significant human cost. Additionally, several training deaths result from equipment failures in Tigers and other new vehicles, mechanical problems that should have been identified before troops operated the machines. The rushed timeline, driven by strategic necessity, creates conditions where equipment testing and troop training happen simultaneously. Soldiers die identifying defects that peacetime testing would have discovered. But Germany in 1942 cannot afford peacetime development cycles. The Eastern Front demands immediate reinforcement regardless of cost. By late 1942, Das Reich completes transformation from broken infantry division into fully equipped panzer formation. The statistics tell part of the story: 20,000 men, 145 tanks, mechanized throughout, possessing firepower and mobility that few formations can match. But numbers don't capture the division's character, forged through 2 years of combat and atrocity. Das Reich combines tactical excellence with moral bankruptcy, professional military skill with ideological fanaticism, unit cohesion built partially on shared criminality. The division returning to the Eastern Front differs fundamentally from the formation that retreated in January. They possess greater firepower but similar ruthlessness, better equipment but unchanged ideology. The panzer conversion restored Das Reich's physical capabilities while doing nothing to address the institutional culture that produced systematic war crimes. In fact, the increased lethality makes Das Reich more dangerous in every sense, more capable of destroying enemy military forces, and more capable of massacring civilians. The combination of armor superiority and ideological extremism will prove devastating when Das Reich returns to combat in early 1943. February 14th, 1943. Kharkov, Ukraine. Soviet artillery pounds the city. In preparation for final assault, for 3 days Soviet forces have been tightening the noose around Kharkov, fourth largest city in the Soviet Union, industrial center that Hitler declared must be held at all costs. Das Reich occupies defensive positions throughout the city alongside several Wehrmacht divisions. Paul Hausser, now commanding the entire SS Panzer Corps, including Das Reich, studies situation maps, showing Soviet forces advancing from 3 directions. The mathematics are simple and brutal. German forces are outnumbered 3-1, nearly surrounded, facing imminent encirclement. Hitler's orders are explicit: hold Kharkov regardless of casualties, no retreat authorized. Hausser makes decision that defines his career and saves Das Reich from destruction. He orders evacuation. Against direct Führer command, SS Panzer Corps withdraws from Kharkov during night of February 15th through 16th. The retreat is controlled chaos, units leapfrogging rearward, while rearguards delay Soviet pursuit. By morning of February 16th, Das Reich has escaped the trap. Hitler is furious, threatens court-martial, but Hausser's disobedience preserves 3 SS Panzer divisions that would have been annihilated if they obeyed orders. Within days, these divisions will become centerpiece of German counteroffensive that transforms Eastern Front situation. The strategic situation in February 1943 represents German low point on Eastern Front since Moscow disaster. The catastrophe at Stalingrad cost Germany an entire army, 300,000 men killed or captured. Soviet forces are advancing across broad front, pressing German armies backward, threatening to collapse entire southern sector. Soviet commanders believe Germany is finished, that continuous offensive pressure will crack Wehrmacht and open route to final victory. But the Soviets are overextended, their supply lines stretched thin, their formations depleted by months of offensive operations. German intelligence identifies the weakness. Soviet spearheads have outrun their logistics, creating vulnerability that mobile armored forces could exploit. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, commanding Army Group South, develops counteroffensive plan using remaining German armoured reserves. Das Reich and other SS Panzer divisions, having escaped Kharkov encirclement, become Manstein's striking force. The plan is audacious: allow Soviets to continue advancing, then strike their exposed flanks with concentrated armour, encircle the spearheads, destroy them before they can retreat to safety. February 20th, 1943. Das Reich spearheads the counteroffensive southwest of Kharkov. The tactical situation perfectly suits their aggressive doctrine. Soviet forces are advancing rapidly, but in dispersed columns, focused on exploitation rather than security. Das Reich attacks into their flanks at dawn, achieving complete surprise. The Panzer Regiment, with Tigers leading and Panzer IVs following, smashes through Soviet screening forces and penetrates deep into rear areas. Panzer Grenadiers in half-tracks follow the armour, clearing Soviet positions, securing captured ground. The advance covers 15 miles on first day, 25 miles on second day. Das Reich's training and equipment advantages become decisive. Soviet T-34 tanks, encountering Tigers at long range, find their 76mm guns ineffective against German frontal armour. Tigers systematically destroy Soviet armour from ranges where return fire cannot penetrate. The technical superiority that Tigers' designers promised finally materializes under battlefield conditions. Das Reich crews achieve kill ratios exceeding 5-1, destroying Soviet tanks while suffering minimal losses themselves. The exploitation phase demonstrates Das Reich at peak performance. The division doesn't just defeat Soviet forces, they annihilate them. The reconnaissance battalion races ahead, identifying Soviet columns before they can organize defense. The Panzer Regiment strikes these columns in march formation, when tanks are road-bound and vulnerable. Panzer Grenadiers follow up, clearing surviving enemy infantry, capturing or destroying supply vehicles. Soviet commanders attempt to establish defensive lines, but Das Reich's tempo prevents consolidation. Before Soviet forces can dig in, German armor appears from unexpected directions, forcing hasty retreats that degenerate into routes. Within 5 days, Das Reich advances 40 miles, encircles elements of Soviet 3rd Tank Army, and creates conditions for recapture of Kharkov. Wehrmacht officers observing the operation describe it as textbook mobile warfare, rapid maneuver, combined arms coordination, relentless exploitation that gives enemy no time to recover. Das Reich has vindicated the investment in their conversion to Panzer Division. March 11th, 1943. Das Reich approaches Kharkov from west and south, preparing to recapture the city they evacuated 3 weeks earlier. Soviet forces have transformed Kharkov into fortress, establishing defensive positions throughout the urban landscape. Street fighting begins at dawn. This is combat that negates most German advantages. Tiger's long-range firepower is useless in city streets, where engagement ranges measure in meters. Mobility becomes liability as tanks navigate rubble-filled streets, where Soviet anti-tank teams hide in cellars. Reich shifts tactics, using infantry armor teams in house-to-house fighting. Panzer Grenadiers clear buildings methodically, while tanks provide direct fire support, blasting strongpoints that infantry cannot reduce. The advance is measured in blocks per day, slow grinding attrition that accumulates casualties, but steadily compresses Soviet defensive perimeter. March 11th sees particularly vicious fighting, 1,200 Soviet casualties in single day. As Das Reich pushes into city center, Soviet troops fight tenaciously, defending every building, counterattacking German footholds, making Das Reich pay for each advance. The atrocities begin as military situation clarifies. By March 13th, Soviet defeat is certain. Remaining Soviet forces attempt to evacuate eastward. Leaving behind rearguards and wounded, Das Reich discovers NKVD executed approximately 240 Ukrainian civilians before retreating, political prisoners killed to prevent their liberation by German forces. Das Reich officers use this discovery as justification for their own massacre. Over next 48 hours, Das Reich troops systematically execute 1,800 civilians accused of being partisans and collaborators. No trials occur, no evidence of individual guilt is required. The victims include women, elderly, and children. Some are shot in basements of buildings they inhabited. Others are marched to outskirts and killed in mass executions. The justification in German reports claims these killings were security measures, eliminating potential threats in newly captured city. The reality is retribution. Soviet actions provided excuse for German atrocity that far exceeded any legitimate military purpose. Wehrmacht units operating in same sector execute far fewer civilians, suggesting Das Reich's actions reflect division culture rather than military necessity. March 15th, 1943. Das Reich controls Kharkov. The battle statistics reveal both tactical triumph and strategic limitations. German forces destroyed elements of 15 Soviet divisions, recaptured 200 miles of territory in 28 days, inflicted over 40,000 Soviet casualties. Das Reich's specific contribution: 184 confirmed Soviet tanks destroyed, 38 aircraft shot down by division anti-aircraft units, approximately 8,000 Soviet casualties inflicted. The German casualties, 4,500 killed and wounded, representing 22% of division strength. This casualty rate would cripple most formations, but Das Reich remains operational, testament to training quality and unit cohesion. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, assessing the defeat in post-war writings, identifies Das Reich as the most dangerous division we faced during the Kharkov counterstroke. The complement is ambiguous: dangerous because tactically excellent or dangerous because unusually ruthless, perhaps both. The propaganda value of Kharkov victory exceeds its military significance. After Stalingrad's disaster, Germany desperately needs success story to maintain public morale. Kharkov provides that narrative. Nazi propaganda machinery produces 23 newsreels featuring the battle, most highlighting SS Panzer Division's role. Das Reich appears prominently, footage of Tiger tanks advancing, Panzer Grenadiers clearing buildings, captured Soviet equipment being catalogued. Joseph Goebbels' broadcasts describe Kharkov as turning point, proof that German forces retain offensive capability despite recent setbacks. The propaganda carefully omits several facts: that battle was defensive counteroffensive rather than strategic advance, that Soviet forces were overextended and vulnerable rather than at full strength, that recapturing Kharkov merely restored front lines to positions held months earlier. But accuracy matters less than narrative. Kharkov allows German leadership to claim victory, to reassure population that Wehrmacht remains formidable, to justify continued war effort despite mounting costs. The question of whether Das Reich's tactical success and atrocity escalation are related troubles post-war analysts. The pattern is undeniable. Das Reich performs exceptionally well militarily at Kharkov, while simultaneously committing largest massacre since arriving on Eastern Front. Several explanations emerge. First, military success may have emboldened Das Reich leadership to act without restraint, confident that battlefield achievements provide protection from accountability. Second, the intense combat may have brutalized soldiers emotionally, making them more willing to kill non-combatants. Third, the discovery of NKVD executions may have provided psychological permission, framing German atrocities as equivalent retaliation. Fourth, and most disturbing, the massacre may have been calculated demonstration of power, assertion of German dominance in recaptured city. Probably all factors contributed. But the fundamental reality remains: Das Reich could be tactically brilliant and criminally brutal simultaneously. These weren't contradictory identities but complementary ones, both emerging from same organizational culture that valued aggressive action above ethical restraint. The Soviet response to Kharkov defeat shapes Red Army development. Soviet commanders studied the battle intensively, extracting lessons that inform future operations. They recognized that aggressive exploitation without secure logistics creates vulnerability. They note German armored formations' effectiveness when concentrated rather than dispersed. They identify Tiger tanks as threat requiring new anti-tank weapons and tactics. These lessons contribute to Red Army reforms that make Soviet forces progressively more formidable. The irony is thick. Das Reich's Kharkov victory, while tactically impressive, strategically teaches Soviets how to defeat German armor more effectively. By mid-1943, Red Army begins implementing changes directly responsive to Wehrmacht tactics demonstrated at Kharkov. The German tactical triumph plants seeds of future German defeats. The German strategic situation in late March 1943 remains precarious despite Kharkov victory. The Eastern Front has temporarily stabilized, but fundamental problems persist. German casualties since Operation Barbarossa began approach 1.5 million men, losses that cannot be replaced. Soviet industrial production outpaces German manufacturing across all categories: tanks, artillery, aircraft. Soviet manpower reserves dwarf German capacity, allowing Red Army to absorb casualties that would cripple Wehrmacht. Demonstrated that German forces retain tactical excellence and can win battles under favorable conditions. But winning battles no longer translates to winning the war. Germany needs decisive victory that forces Soviet Union to negotiate. Das Reich and other elite formations can shatter Soviet attacks and recapture lost ground. They cannot achieve strategic decision that changes war's fundamental trajectory. The individual soldiers' experience of Kharkov victory varies dramatically based on their role. Tank crews who fought in Tigers describe the battle with satisfaction bordering on euphoria. For first time, they possessed clear technical advantage over Soviet armor. They destroyed enemy tanks before enemy could effectively return fire. The Tigers' thick armor provided unprecedented protection. One tank commander writes home, "In France we feared every anti-tank gun. In Russia we died to T-34s. At Kharkov we were invincible." The Tiger makes us what propaganda always claimed we were. But Panzer Grenadiers who fought house to house in Kharkov describe different experience: brutal close-quarters combat where technological advantages meant nothing, where Soviet soldiers fought with desperate courage, where casualties mounted in savage room-to-room fighting, and soldiers who participated in the massacres mostly remained silent in letters home, not mentioning the executions or framing them as necessary security measures against partisan threat. The command relationships during Kharkov campaign illuminate SS Wehrmacht tensions. Field Marshal von Manstein, Wehrmacht commander, provides strategic direction and coordinates combined arms operations. Paul Hausser, SS commander, leads tactical execution with 3 SS Panzer Divisions. The relationship is professional, but strained. Manstein appreciates SS divisions' combat effectiveness, but resents their political connections and preferential treatment. Hausser respects Manstein's strategic vision, but chafes at Wehrmacht command authority over SS forces. The disobedience at Kharkov's evacuation particularly troubles Wehrmacht leadership. If SS commanders will disregard Hitler's direct orders when tactically convenient, what prevents similar disobedience toward Wehrmacht commanders? The SS response is that Hausser's decision was militarily correct, proving SS commanders possess operational judgment that Hitler's political interference threatened to override. The argument has merit but establishes dangerous precedent. Elite formations claiming right to ignore orders they consider mistaken. March fades into April. The spring mud arrives, temporarily ending major operations as dirt roads become impassable. Das Reich withdraws from Kharkov to rear areas for rest and refitting. The division requires substantial repair after intense combat. 26 Tigers are damaged and need maintenance. 67 Panzer IVs require various repairs. Infantry battalions absorb replacement troops to restore depleted ranks. Officers conduct after-action reviews, extracting lessons and disseminating them through training. The soldiers themselves oscillate between exhaustion and pride. They have proven Das Reich retains combat excellence, despite Russian winter's trauma. They recaptured major city and destroyed significant Soviet forces. The victory validates their elite identity, confirms their superiority over regular Wehrmacht units. But some veterans privately recognize uncomfortable truth. Kharkov was defensive counteroffensive against overextended enemy, not decisive blow that changes war's outcome. They won a battle. The war remains far from won, and ahead lies Operation Citadel, the offensive at Kursk, where Das Reich will face Soviet forces that learned from Kharkov's defeat and prepared accordingly. July 5, 1943. 2:30 in the morning. Belgorod sector, southern shoulder of Kursk salient. Das Reich occupies forward assembly areas in the pre-dawn darkness. 145 tanks arranged in attack formation across several miles of front. The soldiers have waited weeks for this moment, delayed repeatedly as German High Command debated whether to proceed with Operation Citadel. Now the order finally comes. At 4:30, German artillery opens fire across the entire Kursk salient, 3,000 guns firing simultaneously in bombardment that rivals anything the Eastern Front has witnessed. The ground trembles with sustained concussion. 30 minutes later, the barrage lifts and Das Reich surges forward into Soviet defensive positions. But something is immediately wrong. The Soviets are not surprised. Their defensive lines are deeper and more sophisticated than German intelligence predicted. Soviet artillery responds with counter-battery fire that demonstrates they knew exactly where German forces would attack. The advance gains ground but slowly, painfully, at terrible cost. Within 12 hours, Das Reich realizes they are not conducting breakthrough operation, but frontal assault into prepared defenses. The battle that German leadership promised would deliver decisive victory instead becomes grinding attrition that will break Das Reich as combat formation. Operation Citadel represents Hitler's attempt to regain initiative on Eastern Front through massive armored offensive. The Kursk salient, a bulge in Soviet lines extending westward, offers tempting target. Pincer attack from north and south could encircle and destroy substantial Soviet forces, while straightening German front lines. German planning begins in April, but execution delays until July as new tanks and equipment arrive. These delays prove fatal. Soviet intelligence learned of German intentions through multiple sources, including the Lucy spy ring in Switzerland. Stalin commits enormous resources to Kursk's defense, constructing defensive belts extending 100 miles deep, planting 1.3 million mines, positioning over 3,000 tanks and 20,000 artillery pieces. Red Army doesn't merely prepare to defend Kursk, they transform the salient into killing ground designed to bleed German armored forces until they collapse. Das Reich attacks into this trap on July 5th. Believing they face conventional defensive positions, they instead encounter most sophisticated defensive system yet devised, specifically designed to defeat exactly the tactics Das Reich employs. The first day's combat reveals Soviet preparations' extent. Das Reich advances 9 miles, respectable progress by Eastern Front standards, but far short of breakthrough that Citadel requires. The Tigers lead the assault, their heavy armor and firepower clearing paths through Soviet positions. But Soviet anti-tank guns, positioned in depth and well camouflaged, extract steady toll. German tanks that penetrate first defensive belt encounter second belt, then third, each successive line forcing renewed assault. Soviet infantry fights from prepared positions with overhead cover, making them difficult to suppress with artillery. The minefields are more extensive than anything Das Reich previously encountered, channeling German armor into kill zones where anti-tank guns concentrate fire. By day's end, Das Reich has suffered 300 casualties and lost 18 tanks. These losses would be acceptable if breakthrough was imminent. But reconnaissance reports indicate multiple defensive belts remain intact ahead. The sobering realization spreads through division. There will be no quick victory at Kursk. July 12, 1943, Prokhorovka. The battle reaches its climax, in largest tank engagement in history. Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, over 800 tanks strong, attacks 2nd SS Panzer Corps, including Das Reich, in meeting engagement that degenerates into close-range melee. The battle occurs across open terrain marked by rolling hills and scattered ravines. Soviet T-34 tanks attack in mass formations, accepting horrific losses to close range, where their smaller guns can penetrate German armor. Das Reich tanks engage targets at ranges sometimes measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. The Tigers' range advantage becomes irrelevant as Soviet tanks swarm around them, targeting thinner side and rear armor. The fighting lasts 9 hours, tank crews exhausting ammunition, ramming enemy vehicles, bailing out of burning hulls, only to continue fighting with small arms. The battlefield becomes graveyard, over 300 destroyed tanks smoldering across several square miles. Das Reich claims 140 Soviet tanks destroyed, but loses 32 of their own, including 5 Tigers. The Soviet attack disrupts German offensive momentum. Prokhorovka doesn't end Operation Citadel, but signals its failure. German armored forces cannot achieve breakthrough against Soviet defenses, willing to accept any casualty level to prevent German success. July 17, 1943. Hitler orders Operation Citadel terminated. Allied invasion of Sicily requires transfer of German forces to Mediterranean theater. This is official explanation. The reality is that Citadel has failed on its own terms. German forces advanced into Kursk salient, but never achieved breakthrough. Soviet defensive depth absorbed German offensive power, exacting unbearable casualties without collapsing. Das Reich statistics illustrate the disaster. Advanced 12 miles in 12 days versus 40 miles in 3 days at Kharkov. Lost 67 tanks, representing 46% of armor strength, versus minimal losses at Kharkov. Suffered 3,200 casualties, including 800 killed versus manageable losses in previous operations. The casualty rate approaches levels that destroyed Das Reich during winter 1941 through 42. But Kursk represents different kind of defeat. At Moscow, Das Reich retreated before superior enemy forces in impossible conditions. At Kursk, Das Reich attacks with every advantage, supported by concentrated German armor, and still fails to break Soviet lines. The defeat signals fundamental shift in Eastern Front balance. German tactical excellence no longer suffices against Soviet material superiority and operational competence. The tactical lessons Das Reich extracts from Kursk contradict their established doctrine. Aggressive tempo and bold exploitation produced victory in France and Kharkov. At Kursk, these approaches produced only casualties. Soviet defensive preparation negated German advantages in training and equipment. The minefields forced predictable routes that led into kill zones. The defensive depth meant penetrating first line achieved nothing because multiple lines remained intact. The anti-tank weapons, particularly new Soviet 85mm guns, could defeat even Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges. Das Reich officers conducting after-action analysis reached troubling conclusion. Their tactical doctrine assumes maneuver space and enemy mistakes that Soviets no longer provide. Against prepared defenses supported by unlimited reserves, Das Reich's aggressive tactics become suicide. But abandoning these tactics means abandoning the division's identity as elite assault formation. The cognitive dissonance paralyzes doctrinal development. Das Reich cannot adapt without admitting their fundamental approach has become obsolete. The psychological impact on Das Reich soldiers manifests in deteriorating morale and increasing brutality. The men who attacked at Kursk believed they were delivering knockout blow that would restore German initiative. The operation's failure shatters this conviction. Soldiers recognize that Germany can no longer win decisive victories, that best possible outcome is stalemate. Letters home, censored by division mail officers, reveal spreading pessimism. One Panzergrenadier writes, "We fight well, but it's not enough. The Russians have too many tanks, too many men, too much space. Each day we kill hundreds but thousands more arrive." This recognition that individual courage and tactical skill cannot overcome strategic disadvantage corrodes the ideological certainty that sustained Das Reich through previous hardships. The division's response is to intensify violence against civilians, asserting dominance over helpless victims to compensate for battlefield impotence. Soviet villages in Das Reich's operational area experienced systematic destruction, buildings burned, food supplies confiscated, civilians executed on minimal suspicion of partisan connections. The atrocities serve no military purpose, but provide psychological outlet for soldiers confronting their own failure. August through September 1943. Das Reich withdraws to defensive positions as Red Army launches massive counteroffensives across southern sector. The tactical situation reverses completely from Kursk. Now Das Reich defends against Soviet attacks conducted with increasing sophistication. Soviet commanders have learned from 2 years of defeats. They concentrate overwhelming force at breakthrough points, accepting casualties to achieve penetration. Once through German lines, they exploit rapidly with mechanized forces that bypass strongpoints and drive deep into rear areas. The tactics mirror what Das Reich employed successfully in 1940 and 41. But Soviet execution is cruder, relying on material superiority rather than finesse. Yet crude or not, the tactics work. Das Reich fights skillful defensive battles, inflicting lopsided casualties, counterattacking Soviet penetrations, but slowly, inexorably, they retreat westward. Each defensive success merely delays next withdrawal. By October, Das Reich has yielded all territory captured during Kharkov counterstroke. The strategic failure is absolute. November 1943. Das Reich receives orders to withdraw from Eastern Front for rest and refitting. The division that departs Russia bears little resemblance to the confident formation that spearheaded Operation Citadel. Equipment losses exceed 50%, 68 tanks destroyed or abandoned, over 300 vehicles lost to combat and mechanical failure. Personnel casualties approach 40%, 7,800 killed, wounded, or missing from 20,000 strength. The survivors are physically and mentally exhausted from 6 months of continuous combat. But unlike the withdrawal in January 1942, this departure carries different character. Das Reich remains organized, evacuating in good order rather than routed chaos. They maintain discipline despite defeats. The officer corps, though depleted, retains competent leadership. The division has been beaten but not broken. Yet something fundamental has changed. The confidence that characterized Das Reich through France, Kharkov, and early Kursk has evaporated. These soldiers have learned that tactical excellence provides no guarantee of victory, that Germany can lose despite their best efforts. This knowledge makes them simultaneously less dangerous as military formation and more dangerous as desperate men willing to commit any atrocity to assert their dominance. April 1944. Das Reich deploys to southern France for reconstitution. The division receives replacement personnel and equipment, rebuilding toward authorized strength. But the strategic situation has transformed since their last French deployment. Allied forces are preparing invasion of Western Europe. French resistance, emboldened by German defeats in Russia and Allied advances in Italy, intensifies operations against occupation forces. Das Reich's assignment is occupation security and anti-partisan operations, while refitting for eventual return to Eastern Front. The mission places Das Reich in direct conflict with French resistance networks conducting increasingly bold attacks. Unlike Eastern Front, where violence against civilians occurred alongside conventional combat operations, in France, the violence becomes primary mission. Das Reich is no longer fighting army with partisan problems. They are fighting partisans with minimal conventional opposition. The results will be catastrophic. June 6, 1944. Allied forces land in Normandy. Das Reich receives immediate orders to move north and counterattack the invasion, but movement proves impossible during daylight due to Allied air superiority. The division must advance at night, progress measured in dozens of miles rather than hundreds. French resistance, coordinating with Allied headquarters, intensifies attacks against Das Reich columns. Bridges are destroyed. Supply trucks are ambushed. Communication lines are cut. The harassment delays Das Reich's arrival in Normandy by over 2 weeks. German commanders in Normandy desperately need reinforcements. Das Reich possesses combat power that could significantly impact the battle. But they cannot reach the battlefield because French partisans, lightly armed civilians conducting guerrilla warfare, successfully delay elite Panzer Division. The military frustration this produces becomes excuse for atrocity on unprecedented scale. June 9, 1944. Tölz, central France. French resistance forces ambush a Das Reich convoy, killing 40 German soldiers in surprise attack. The next day, Das Reich conducts reprisal that shocks even occupation forces accustomed to German brutality. They hang 99 French civilians from town balconies and lampposts. bodies suspended above streets as public display. The victims are selected essentially at random, men between 18 and 45 rounded up from town, no evidence linking them to resistance required. German military administration officials object that the reprisal is excessive even by occupation standards. SS command ignores these objections. Das Reich's internal logic justifies the massacre. Guerrilla warfare violates laws of war, therefore civilians supporting guerrillas forfeit protection. Collective punishment is appropriate response. But this logic erases distinction between combatants and non-combatants entirely. If any French civilian might be resistance supporter, then all French civilians become legitimate targets. The tall hangings represent policy decision. Das Reich will terrorize French population into submission through mass murder. June 10, 1944. Oradour-sur-Glane. Das Reich commits its most infamous atrocity. A battalion from Der Führer regiment surrounds the village, herds all 642 inhabitants into the town square, separates men from women and children. The men are forced into barns and shot with machine guns. The women and children are locked inside the church. Das Reich soldiers pile wood and fuel inside, then ignite it. The church burns with women and children inside, their screams audible across the village. Anyone attempting to escape is shot. The village itself is systematically destroyed. Every building burned, wells poisoned, crops destroyed. Only 6 people survive. 1 woman who jumped from the church window, 5 men who played dead among corpses in the barns. The justification Das Reich provides is that Oradour harbored resistance fighters and weapons. Post-war investigation finds no evidence supporting these claims. Oradour appears to have been selected essentially at random, a village that happened to be convenient when Das Reich decided to conduct exemplary massacre to terrorize French population. The complete lack of military necessity makes Oradour particularly damning. This wasn't collateral damage or excessive response to actual threat. It was calculated mass murder designed to spread terror. The pattern connecting Kursk, Tölz, and Oradour illuminates how military frustration transforms into atrocity. At Kursk, Das Reich encounters enemy they cannot defeat, despite tactical superiority. The cognitive dissonance between self-image as elite warriors and battlefield reality produces psychological crisis. When Das Reich later encounters French resistance delaying their movement to Normandy, the accumulated frustration explodes in violence against available victims. The resistance fighters who ambushed convoys mostly escape. Das Reich cannot catch guerrillas who vanish into civilian population, so they massacre civilians instead, asserting dominance over helpless victims to compensate for military impotence. The ideology that Das Reich internalized during training provides framework for this violence. Enemies are racial inferiors who merit no mercy. Civilian populations supporting resistance are collectively guilty. German setbacks prove enemy treachery rather than German weakness. These beliefs transform war crimes from aberration into logical policy response. June 28, 1944. Das Reich finally reaches Normandy. 18 days after D-Day, having been delayed by resistance attacks and Allied air superiority. The division that arrives on the battlefield is still formidable on paper: 17,000 men, 130 tanks, full complement of supporting weapons. But the delays have been catastrophic for German strategic position. Allied forces have consolidated beachhead, built up overwhelming material superiority, and begun breakout operations. Das Reich arrives too late to affect battle's outcome. They will fight in Normandy for 2 months, conducting defensive operations against enemy with total air superiority and unlimited artillery support. The tactical situation is nightmare scenario. Des Reich must defend against attacks they cannot prevent, endure bombardments they cannot suppress, maneuver under skies controlled by enemy aircraft. The division that once prided itself on aggressive exploitation now fights desperate defensive battles with inevitable outcome. Kursk demonstrated Soviet defenses could defeat German attacks. Normandy will demonstrate Allied offensives can destroy German defenses. Des Reich approaches its breaking point. June 29th, 1944. Saint-Lô sector, Normandy. Das Reich commits to immediate counterattack. Despite 18 days of exhausting movement from southern France, German commanders need to throw Allied forces back into the sea before beachhead becomes unbreakable. Das Reich represents largest uncommitted armoured reserve in Normandy. The formation German leadership hopes can deliver decisive counterstroke. The attack launches at dawn across hedgerow country, the distinctive Norman bocage landscape, where every field is bounded by earthen berms topped with thick vegetation. The terrain negates every German advantage. Tanks cannot maneuver across country, but must follow roads and lanes where they become vulnerable to Allied anti-tank weapons. Infantry cannot see beyond adjacent hedgerow, making coordination impossible. Artillery observation is nearly blind, unable to identify targets in the enclosed landscape. Within hours, the counterattack bogs down. Das Reich advances perhaps 1 mile before encountering prepared American defensive positions. The Americans don't attempt mobile defense, but dig in and call for artillery support. Within minutes, American artillery fires concentration that kills or wounds 100 Das Reich soldiers. The division has experienced heavy artillery before, but never with this volume and accuracy. Forward observers with radios direct fire from dozens of batteries simultaneously, blanketing German positions with high explosive that makes movement suicidal. The afternoon of June 29th introduces Das Reich to Allied air power's full fury. At 2:30, soldiers hear unfamiliar sound, multiple aircraft engines approaching at low altitude. Then Thunderbolt fighter bombers appear, 4 aircraft diving toward Das Reich columns, each carrying 2 500-pound bombs and 8 rockets. The aircraft attack with precision that shocks German veterans. Bombs fall directly onto tank positions. Rockets streak toward vehicles with terrifying accuracy. Machine gun fire rakes exposed infantry. The attack lasts perhaps 3 minutes, then the aircraft are gone. Das Reich counts casualties, 28 tanks destroyed or damaged, over 60 men killed, twice that number wounded. All from single 4 aircraft flight. The psychological impact exceeds the physical damage. Das Reich soldiers have operated under enemy air superiority before, but never faced tactical air power, this responsive and lethal. On Eastern Front, Soviet aircraft attacked sporadically and often ineffectively. In Normandy, Allied aircraft appear within minutes of request, strike with precision and return repeatedly throughout daylight hours. Movement becomes possible only at night. Daylight operations invite annihilation from above. The tactical reality of Normandy combat contradicts everything Das Reich's doctrine emphasizes. Their training stressed aggressive maneuver, rapid exploitation, maintaining initiative through audacious action. But audacity in Normandy produces only casualties. Allied artillery superiority is so overwhelming that German infantry cannot concentrate without attracting devastating fire missions. Allied air superiority is so complete that German armor cannot maneuver in daylight. Allied material superiority is so vast that trading casualties becomes losing proposition for Germans. Das Reich officers attempt to adapt, shifting to night operations and small unit infiltration tactics. But these adjustments abandon the division's core identity as elite assault formation. They are no longer spearhead but desperate defenders, no longer attacking to win, but counterattacking to avoid collapse. The psychological adjustment proves nearly as difficult as tactical adaptation. These soldiers believed themselves members of elite formation capable of extraordinary achievements. Normandy demonstrates that training and courage matter little against enemy with unlimited artillery and total air control. July 8th, 1944, Hill 192. Overlooking St. Lô, Das Reich receives orders to capture this critical terrain that dominates approaches to the town. American forces, specifically 2nd Infantry Division, occupy prepared positions on the hill. Das Reich commits the entire Der Führer Panzergrenadier Regiment to the assault. 2,000 men supported by 30 tanks. The attack begins at dawn, following brief artillery preparation. Das Reich infantry advances in small groups, using hedgerows for cover, moving methodically toward American positions. But American observers on the hill call for artillery support, and the response is immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of artillery batteries fire time-on-target missions that blanket German assault routes. The bombardment is so intense that Das Reich companies lose cohesion, soldiers pinned in ditches, unable to advance or retreat. When artillery lifts, American machine guns engage any Germans attempting to move. Das Reich commits reinforcements, attempting to overwhelm American positions through sheer persistence. 6 separate assaults occur during July 8th. None gain more than 300 meters. By evening, Der Führer Regiment has suffered 40% casualties, 450 men killed or wounded. Hill 192 remains in American hands. The one-day casualty rate equals entire week of combat on Eastern Front. July 11th. Das Reich continues attacking Hill 192. Despite previous days' losses, the orders from Corps headquarters are explicit. Take the hill regardless of cost. Das Reich has become fixation for German commanders who cannot accept that American forces can repel elite SS division. The attacks repeat pattern: artillery preparation, infantry assault, American defensive fire, German casualties, withdrawal to start positions. German soldiers begin questioning the tactical competence of commanders ordering these futile assaults. Recovered after his death, describes the experience: we attack into fire that cannot be suppressed. Our artillery is too weak. The Americans have unlimited shells. We advance, men fall. We retreat. Then we attack again. This is not warfare but slaughter. We accomplish nothing except dying. By July 12th, Das Reich has suffered an additional 300 casualties attempting to capture Hill 192. Total casualties for the position exceed 750 men. German forces eventually capture the hill weeks later after Americans withdraw during Operation Cobra. Das Reich's sacrifice achieved nothing. July 25th, 1944. Operation Cobra, American breakout offensive, begins with carpet bombing that drops 3,000 tons of bombs on German positions in single morning. Das Reich occupies defensive positions directly in the path of American assault. The bombing is beyond anything experienced even by Eastern Front veterans. The earth itself seems to liquesce under sustained concussion. Entire positions disappear, men and equipment vaporized. Communication breaks down as telephone lines are cut and radio operators are killed. When bombing finally stops, American armor and infantry attack into positions held by stunned survivors. Das Reich attempts organized defense, but the situation is chaos. Units are intermixed, command structure fractured, ammunition expenditure during bombing defense has left many positions nearly empty. The American advance covers 15 miles in first 48 hours, a breakthrough that shatters German defensive lines and creates exploitation opportunity that American commanders eagerly seize. Das Reich, positioned at breakthrough point, suffers catastrophic losses, 2,000 casualties in 3 days, 45 tanks destroyed or abandoned, withdrawal transformed into barely controlled retreat. The retreat through Normandy, in late July and early August, shows Das Reich's professional competence under impossible conditions. Despite overwhelming pressure, the division maintains organization when other units disintegrate. Rear guards delay American pursuit, buying time for main body to establish successive defensive positions. Officers improvise combined arms teams from scattered survivors, welding together ad hoc formations that fight more effectively than their degraded state suggests possible. Tank crews abandon vehicles immobilized by mechanical failure after destroying them to prevent capture. Infantry soldiers march through days and nights with minimal food and water, maintaining discipline despite exhaustion. But competent retreat remains retreat. Each defensive line holds briefly, then collapses under artillery bombardment and armor assault. Each withdrawal loses more equipment abandoned when vehicles run out of fuel or break down irreparably. Division that prided itself on offensive operations masters defensive warfare through necessity. They become experts at retreat, developing procedures for withdrawing under fire that minimize casualties. The skill they demonstrate would be admirable in different contexts. In Normandy, it merely postpones inevitable. August 19th through 21st, 1944. The Falaise Pocket. German forces attempting to retreat from Normandy face encirclement as Allied armies close pincers from north and south. Approximately 100,000 German soldiers crowd into shrinking pocket, subjected to continuous artillery fire and air attack. Das Reich receives mission as rear guard holding open escape route, while other formations withdraw eastward. This is suicide assignment, covering retreat, while under attack from 3 sides with limited ammunition and fuel. Das Reich soldiers understand their orders likely mean death or capture. Yet they comply, fighting desperate defensive actions that allow thousands of other German soldiers to escape encirclement. The defensive battles around Falaise represent Das Reich's finest hour and greatest tragedy. They fight with extraordinary courage and skill, buying time with their lives. One company holds crossroads against American armor for 6 hours, destroying 11 tanks before being overrun. Battalion-sized formations reduce to platoon strength, but maintain cohesion. Officers lead from front, suffering disproportionate casualties. The rearguard action succeeds, significant German forces escape the pocket. But Das Reich pays terrible price. August 21st, 1944, remnants of Das Reich break out of Falaise pocket and retreat towards Seine River. The survivors gather in assembly areas east of the pocket, conducting roll calls that reveal catastrophic losses. The division that entered Normandy with 19,000 men musters 5,000 survivors. Equipment losses are equally devastating. 15 operational tanks remain from 150, 200 vehicles from over 2,000, most artillery pieces destroyed or abandoned. Das Reich has ceased to exist as combat formation. What remains are traumatized survivors of 2 months' continuous battle under conditions that broke every advantage the division previously enjoyed. These men have learned that elite training and ideological commitment provide no protection against enemy with material superiority. They have watched American artillery pulverize defensive positions with impunity. They have experienced American air power destroying columns in minutes. They have suffered defeat after defeat despite fighting with skill and courage. The psychological impact equals the physical destruction. Das Reich's self-image as invincible elite has been shattered beyond repair. The statistical comparison between Normandy and previous campaigns reveals the shifting balance of Eastern Front versus Western Front warfare. At Kharkov in February through March 1943, Das Reich advanced 40 miles in 3 days while suffering 4,500 casualties over entire operation. In Normandy from late June through August 1944, Das Reich retreated consistently while suffering 14,000 casualties in 2 months. At Kharkov, Das Reich destroyed 184 Soviet tanks while losing relatively few of their own. In Normandy, Das Reich lost more tanks to air attack, 110, than ground combat, 55. The kill-loss ratio shifted dramatically. 3 German tanks destroyed for every Allied tank knocked out, versus 5 Soviet tanks destroyed per German loss at Kharkov. The numbers reveal that Western Allied forces, particularly Americans, fight differently than Soviets. Where Soviets accepted massive casualties to achieve breakthrough, Americans used firepower to minimize their own losses while maximizing German casualties. Das Reich's aggressive tactics that worked against Soviets, willing to trade men for territory, failed against Americans who refused to trade anything, simply bombing and shelling German positions until resistance collapsed. Individual experiences of Normandy vary dramatically based on role and timing. Tank crews who arrived in late June described 2 months of nightmarish combat, moving only at night, hiding tanks in woods and buildings during day, conducting brief engagements before Allied artillery forced withdrawal, abandoning vehicle after vehicle as fuel ran out, or mechanical problems made them immobile. Infantry soldiers describe even worse conditions: constant artillery fire, inability to move in daylight, watching position after position, pulverized by bombardment, retreating from one temporary defensive line to another. Medical personnel describe overwhelmed aid stations, hundreds of wounded with inadequate supplies, impossible decisions about who receives treatment when morphine and bandages run low. Officers describe communication breakdowns, inability to coordinate combined arms when units are scattered and under fire, issuing orders that become obsolete before they can be executed. The common thread through all accounts is sense of helplessness, of fighting against enemy whose material superiority makes German tactical skill irrelevant. The comparison between Das Reich in France 1940 versus France 1944 illustrates how completely the war has shifted. In May through June 1940, Das Reich advanced 500 miles in 30 days, capturing thousands of prisoners, suffering relatively light casualties, demonstrating that aggressive tactics and superior training produced decisive results. In June through August 1944, Das Reich struggles to hold positions, retreats continuously, suffers catastrophic casualties, discovers that training and aggression mean little against enemy with unlimited resources. The same terrain witnesses opposite outcomes. The difference is not Das Reich's capability, which remains high throughout. The difference is Allied capability, which has grown from military ineffectiveness in 1940 to overwhelming superiority in 1944. Das Reich has not become worse soldiers. Their enemies have become much better armed, much better supported, much more numerous. The equation has shifted beyond any possibility of German victory through tactical excellence alone. September 1944. Days Reich's survivors reached Germany proper, crossing Rhine River into homeland they left 5 months earlier. The division requires complete reconstitution, absorbing thousands of replacement troops, receiving rebuilt tanks and vehicles from factories working around the clock. But the survivors who form core of reconstituted division carry Normandy's trauma. They have experienced sustained defeat against enemy they could not overcome. They have learned that courage and skill provide no guarantee of survival or success. They have lost faith in German victory, though most dare not speak this belief aloud. The letters home from survivors, when they mention combat at all, reveal profound pessimism. One officer writes to his wife, "We fight well, but the Americans fight better, not individually but collectively. They coordinate air, artillery, armor, and infantry with efficiency that makes our combined arms doctrine look primitive, and they have limitless supplies while we scrounge for ammunition and fuel. I see no path to victory." This recognition spreads through the division despite officers' attempts to maintain morale. Days Reich is being rebuilt physically, but remains broken psychologically. The next deployment will send them back to Eastern Front, where Soviet forces now employ tactics similar to Americans while possessing even greater numerical superiority. Days Reich's fate is becoming clear to anyone willing to see it. October 15th, 1944. Southwestern Germany. Das Reich conducts final training exercises before redeployment to the Eastern Front. The division has been rebuilt to 12,000 men, 40% below authorized strength, but adequate for reduced defensive operations that characterized German strategy in late 1944. Equipment includes 60 tanks, mix of Panthers and Panzer IVs, plus supporting vehicles and artillery. The replacement troops are not the motivated volunteers who filled Das Reich's ranks in 1940. Many are conscripts, older men and teenagers, called up as Germany scrapes bottom of manpower barrel. Others are ethnic Germans from occupied territories, men who speak limited German and feel minimal connection to National Socialist ideology. The veteran survivors from Normandy eye these replacements with skepticism. Can these undertrained, undermotivated soldiers maintain Das Reich's elite identity? The training exercises provide discouraging answer. Replacements struggle with basic infantry tactics. Tank crews lack experience coordinating with infantry. The aggressive initiative that characterized Das Reich operations has been replaced with cautious defensiveness born from repeated defeats. Officers recognize they are leading shadow of former division, Das Reich in name only, lacking the cohesion and capability that once justified elite designation. October 28th, 1944. Das Reich deploys to Hungary, where Soviet forces threaten to break through into Balkans and Central Europe. The strategic situation is catastrophic. Romania has switched sides, joining Soviets and attacking German forces. Bulgaria has capitulated. Yugoslavia is largely controlled by communist partisans. Hungary represents last barrier preventing Soviet advance into Austria and southern Germany. German forces in Hungary include several panzer divisions scraped together from various formations, attempting to establish defensive line that can hold through winter. Das Reich joins this conglomeration, assigned to defend approaches to Budapest. The operational environment differs from anything Das Reich previously experienced. Urban warfare in Budapest suburbs, fighting across Hungarian plains that offer little natural defensive terrain, combating Soviet forces that have learned tactical lessons from 3 years of defeats and now employ combined arms doctrine, rivaling German sophistication. Das Reich's tactical advantages have vanished. Soviet artillery matches German firepower. Soviet armor, particularly T-34, 85s and Stalin heavy tanks, can defeat German tanks at normal combat ranges. Soviet infantry uses radio communication and combined arms coordination that matches or exceeds German capabilities. November through December 1944. Das Reich fights defensive battles around Budapest as Soviet forces progressively tighten encirclement. The combat is brutal attritional warfare without elegance or finesse. Soviet attacks come in waves, sometimes a dozen or more daily, probing German defenses for weaknesses. When penetration occurs, Soviet commanders flood breakthrough with reinforcements, attempting to exploit before Germans can counterattack. Das Reich responds with local counterattacks that temporarily restore defensive lines but cannot address fundamental problem. Soviets possess unlimited reserves, while Germans struggle to replace even daily casualties. The fighting during this period establishes pattern that repeats for months: Soviet assault, German defense, Soviet breakthrough, German counterattack, temporary restoration of line, renewal of Soviet assault. Das Reich casualties accumulate steadily. By late December, the division has lost 30% of personnel who arrived in October. Equipment losses are equally severe: 35 tanks destroyed, over 100 vehicles lost. The division that once measured success by kilometers advanced now measures success by holding positions another day. December 24th, 1944. Budapest is completely encircled. Soviet forces close ring around Hungarian capital, trapping over 100,000 German and Hungarian soldiers, including 8,000 Das Reich personnel. Hitler orders the garrison to hold Budapest, promising relief offensives that will break the siege. Das Reich soldiers trapped in Budapest understand these promises are empty. Soviet encirclement grows stronger daily as reinforcements arrive and defensive positions deepen. German relief attempts from outside the pocket are repelled, with heavy losses. Inside Budapest, the siege warfare is medieval in its brutality. Buildings change hands multiple times, room-to-room fighting with grenades and submachine guns. Soviet artillery shells the city continuously, reducing entire neighborhoods to rubble. Civilians caught in the siege die by thousands from starvation, cold, and combat. Das Reich participates in the defensive battles with desperate energy, knowing surrender means probable death, given their war crimes record. They hold districts and buildings with tenacity that Soviet commanders grudgingly respect. But they cannot break the encirclement or prevent the noose from tightening. January 1945. 3 German relief attempts from outside Budapest pocket fail with catastrophic losses. Das Reich soldiers trapped inside the city monitor radio communications, describing these offensives' destruction. Panzer divisions that might have rescued them are ground down to nothing attempting to penetrate Soviet defenses. By late January, situation inside Budapest becomes unsustainable. Ammunition is nearly exhausted. Food supplies reduced to starvation rations. Fuel exists only in tiny reserves insufficient for vehicular operations. Thousands of wounded fill cellars and basements, lacking medical supplies or treatment. Civilians trapped with military forces are dying daily from starvation and exposure. On February 11, 1945, remaining German forces in Budapest attempt breakout. Das Reich personnel joined this desperate operation, abandoning all heavy equipment, attempting to infiltrate through Soviet lines in small groups under cover of darkness. The breakout is catastrophic failure. Soviet forces, expecting the attempt, establish defensive positions that channel German breakout attempts into kill zones. machine, guns and artillery slaughter, Germans attempting to escape. Some groups penetrate initial Soviet lines only to be hunted down by pursuit forces. Of 8,000 Das Reich soldiers who entered Budapest pocket in December, approximately 700 escape, 91% casualties. The survivors who reach German lines are physical wrecks, frostbitten and starving, many wounded, all psychologically shattered. February through March 1945. Das Reich remnants are combined with survivors from other shattered formations, cobbled together into improvised battle groups that bear division's name, but lack its substance. These ad hoc formations are committed to defensive battles west of Budapest as Soviet forces advance toward Austria. The combat is desperate rearguard action by soldiers who understand defeat is inevitable. They fight not for victory, but to delay Soviet advance, buying time for refugees fleeing westward. The tactical situation allows no elegant maneuvers or clever exploitation. German forces establish defensive positions, hold as long as possible against overwhelming attacks, then retreat to next position. Das Reich's aggressive doctrine, designed for offensive breakthrough operations, has no application in this environment. The skills that made them effective in France and Russia in early war years are irrelevant to defensive battles against numerically superior enemy. But individual soldiers demonstrate remarkable courage and resilience. They continue fighting despite hunger, exhaustion, awareness that they are losing. Unit cohesion persists even as formations are repeatedly shattered and reformed. The veteran survivors provide leadership that holds desperate defensive lines together. March 6, 1945. Operation Spring Awakening, Germany's final offensive of the war. Hitler orders attack in Hungary, using precious remaining armoured reserves, including reconstructed Das Reich. The objective is to recapture Hungarian oil fields that Germany desperately needs. The operation is delusional. German forces lack fuel, ammunition, and personnel for offensive operations, yet Hitler demands strategic offensive that might have been possible in 1941, but is fantasy in 1945. Das Reich commits 60 operational tanks to the offensive, almost everything the division possesses. The attack achieves initial surprise, advancing 20 miles in first 3 days. But Soviet resistance stiffens rapidly as reserves arrive. Within week, German offensive culminates, having exhausted fuel and ammunition without achieving objectives. Soviet counterattack follows immediately, smashing into depleted German forces. Das Reich loses virtually all 60 tanks committed to Operation Spring Awakening. Some are destroyed in combat. Most are abandoned when fuel runs out during retreat. The offensive represents Das Reich's final act as armored formation. After Spring Awakening, the division possesses no tanks, minimal vehicles, functions essentially as infantry formation. The atrocities continue even as Das Reich disintegrates militarily. January 1945. During Budapest siege, Das Reich soldiers discover 200 Hungarian Jews hiding in cellars, attempting to survive until Soviet liberation. Rather than ignoring these refugees or taking them prisoner, Das Reich personnel execute them systematically. The murders serve no military purpose. The war is clearly lost, and these civilians pose no threat. But Das Reich soldiers cannot abandon the ideology that defined them. Their final significant war crime occurs weeks before division's destruction, demonstrating that criminal conduct persisted until the very end. Post-war investigators attempting to identify perpetrators discover that most participants in these final massacres were killed in subsequent combat or captured by Soviets and never returned. The crimes remain documented but largely unpunished, adding to the impunity that protected Das Reich throughout the war. April 1945. Das Reich withdraws into Austria as Soviet forces advance from east and American forces approach from west. The division has been shattered and rebuilt so many times that organizational identity becomes nearly meaningless. Designations but consist primarily of replacements who joined in recent weeks. The veteran corps has been decimated by years of casualties. Officers who survive lead through force of will, maintaining discipline despite obvious futility of continued resistance. German military communications intercepts reveal that Das Reich's combat value in April 1945 rates at 15% of their peak Kharkov strength in early 1943. They are finished as effective formation but continue fighting because no alternative exists. Surrender to Soviets seems impossible given Das Reich's record of atrocities on Eastern Front. The division staggers westward, hoping to reach American lines before Soviet forces overtake them. May 1st, 1945. Hitler commits suicide in Berlin bunker. Germany is fragmenting as military formations attempt to reach Western Allied lines rather than surrender to Soviets. Das Reich moves toward American positions in Austria, abandoning remaining equipment, discarding SS insignia, and documents that might identify them. Many soldiers change into Wehrmacht uniforms, hoping to avoid identification as SS members. The deception sometimes works. American troops initially processing German prisoners often cannot distinguish SS from Wehrmacht personnel without careful documentation review. Das Reich survivors understand that their best hope lies in surrendering to Americans or British, where post-war treatment might allow survival, rather than Soviets, where Das Reich's reputation ensures harsh treatment or execution. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. Das Reich personnel scatter across Austria, some attempting to evade capture, most surrendering to American forces of 11th Armored Division. The Americans initially treat them as ordinary prisoners, herding them into temporary camps with other captured German soldiers. 16,000 men identify themselves as Das Reich members during initial processing. This number includes recent replacements, who served briefly, ethnic Germans conscripted in war's final months, and veteran survivors from years of combat. But careful analysis reveals only 4,200 are original Das Reich members, who served before 1944, approximately 72% replacements. The division that surrenders bears little resemblance to the formation that invaded France in 1940 or Russia in 1941. The institutional knowledge and tactical culture that made Das Reich effective has been largely destroyed through casualties. What remains is name attached to broken collection of survivors. The final accounting of Das Reich's war reveals staggering human cost. Approximately 60,000 men served in the division across 5 years, passing through as original members, replacements or attached personnel. Of these, 21,000 were killed in action, 32,000 wounded, many multiple times. This represents 88% casualty rate, meaning average Das Reich soldier had nearly 9 in 10 chance of being killed or wounded. The casualty rate exceeded almost every Wehrmacht formation, reflecting Das Reich's consistent employment in high-intensity combat on most dangerous sectors. Only a handful of formations experienced comparable attrition, but Das Reich's casualties pale compared to civilian deaths. the division inflicted 94 documented massacres totaling over 23,000 victims across France, Soviet Union, Poland, Hungary, and other occupied territories. For every German soldier killed serving in Das Reich, one civilian was murdered by Das Reich. The ratio makes clear that the division's war crimes were not incidental to their military operations, but central to their identity and conduct throughout the war. The question of why Das Reich soldiers continued fighting until absolute end troubles historians. By late 1944, Germany's defeat was obvious to any realistic observer. Continuing to fight only prolonged the destruction and increased casualties on all sides. Yet Das Reich maintained cohesion and combat effectiveness far beyond point where most units would have collapsed. Several factors explain this persistence. First, ideological indoctrination created worldview where surrender equaled racial betrayal, making continued resistance. Psychological necessity. Second, fear of consequences prevented surrender, particularly to Soviets who would likely execute SS personnel on sight. Third, unit cohesion and loyalty to comrades made individual soldiers unwilling to abandon brothers in arms. Fourth, lack of alternative. German soldiers who deserted faced execution by their own military police. And fifth, perhaps most darkly, collective guilt from years of atrocities created bond among perpetrators who understood they faced judgment if Germany lost. These factors combined to keep Das Reich fighting long past any rational hope of victory. They died defending regime that was collapsing, ideology that had been proven bankruptcy, and criminal enterprise that deserved destruction. Their persistence demonstrated courage, but courage applied to evil purposes, making their final months simultaneously tragic and deserved. November 20, 1946. Nuremberg, Germany. The International Military Tribunal processes evidence against major war criminals, and Das Reich documentation features prominently in prosecution exhibits. Allied investigators have assembled extensive files after-action reports describing civilian massacres, witness testimony from survivors, captured orders revealing systematic criminal conduct, photographs showing atrocity scenes. The prosecutors used Das Reich as case study, demonstrating that Waffen-SS was not military organization, but criminal conspiracy disguised as army. They trace pattern of atrocities from France 1940 through Germany's surrender, showing consistency that proves systematic rather than accidental criminality. Wehrmacht defendants attempt to distance regular army from SS crimes, arguing that Wehrmacht fought honorably while SS committed atrocities. The distinction is partly true, but oversimplified. Wehrmacht committed war crimes extensively on Eastern Front, and Wehrmacht commanders often cooperated with or enabled SS atrocities. But Das Reich's particular record is so egregious that it becomes convenient scapegoat, allowing Wehrmacht to construct narrative of clean army versus criminal SS. This narrative persists for decades despite historical evidence showing Wehrmacht's deep complicity in Nazi war crimes. The immediate post-war justice for Das Reich is limited and unsatisfying. Most division members are processed as prisoners of war, held for months or years, then released without trial. Allied authorities face practical problems. Millions of German prisoners requiring processing, limited resources for investigations, Cold War tensions creating pressure to rebuild West Germany quickly. Das Reich personnel benefit from this chaotic environment. Many destroy SS identification documents and claim Wehrmacht service. Others disappear into general prisoner population, where Allied guards cannot distinguish SS from regular soldiers. Some Das Reich officers are identified and prosecuted, but most escape justice through bureaucratic confusion or deliberate evasion. The contrast with Nazi leadership prosecution at Nuremberg is stark. While top officials receive death sentences or lengthy imprisonments, perpetrators who actually committed atrocities often face minimal consequences. This disparity creates lasting bitterness among victims and survivors who watch mass murderers return to normal civilian lives. January 1953. Bordeaux, France. 21 Das Reich members stand trial for Oradour-sur-Glane massacre. The trial becomes political crisis rather than simple war crimes prosecution. 14 defendants are Alsatians, French citizens from Alsace region that Germany annexed and whose male population was forcibly conscripted into SS. The Alsatian defendants claim they had no choice. Refusal meant death or concentration camp for themselves and families. The prosecution argues that coercion doesn't excuse participation in massacre of 642 civilians. The trial reveals uncomfortable truth. Some Das Reich war criminals were themselves victims of Nazi conscription policies, forced into SS service and complicit in atrocities through combination of coercion and moral failure. The verdict convicts 13 defendants with sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, but political pressure from Alsace region, where families of convicted soldiers protest, leads to pardons within months. All convicted soldiers are released by end of 1953. The French public is outraged. Oradour survivors feel betrayed. The trial demonstrates that post-war justice is contingent on political considerations rather than moral absolutes. The German memory of Das Reich develops along troubling lines during the 1950s and 60s. West Germany, focused on rebuilding and integration into Western alliance, encourages narrative that distinguishes good Germans who resisted Nazis from bad Nazis who committed crimes. Das Reich veterans exploit this framework, claiming they were soldiers who fought honorably, distinct from Nazi party officials who ordered atrocities. Veterans organizations hold reunions where former Das Reich members share memories of comradeship and combat, while minimizing or denying criminal conduct. Published memoirs from Das Reich officers describe tactical operations in detail, but mention atrocities only to claim ignorance or distance from them. Otto, Weidinger der Führer regimental commander, publishes multi-volume divisional history in 1982 that exhaustively covers battles while barely acknowledging massacres. The memoirs are tactically valuable, providing detailed operational accounts, but morally bankrupt, presenting Das Reich as conventional military formation, unfortunate enough to be labeled SS. This selective memory allows veterans to maintain self-image as honorable soldiers while evading responsibility for systematic criminality. The statistics on Das Reich post-war justice reveal systems inadequacy. Over 20,000 men served in division across war, participating in 94 documented massacres, killing over 23,000 civilians. Yet only 69 Das Reich members were ever convicted of war crimes, representing 0.3% prosecution rate. Most convictions resulted in sentences of 5 to 15 years, with early release common. Multiple factors explain this failure. First, Cold War priorities emphasized rebuilding Germany over pursuing Nazi criminals. Second, German courts in 1950s and 60s were staffed partially by judges who served under Nazis, creating institutional reluctance to prosecute. Third, witnesses were often dead or unavailable, scattered across continents, making prosecution difficult. Fourth, West German law required proving individual guilt rather than organizational complicity, allowing defendants to claim ignorance of atrocities committed by other units. Fifth, statute of limitations expired on various crimes, preventing prosecution decades later when evidence emerged. The cumulative effect was near total impunity for most Das Reich war criminals. Notable escapes from justice, particularly Gaulle investigators. Otto Weidinger, who commanded Der Führer Regiment during multiple massacres, including Oradour-sur-Glane, was never prosecuted. He lived peacefully in West Germany, published division histories, attended veterans' reunions, died in 1990 at age 79, having never faced trial. Sylvester Stadler, division commander in 1944 during French massacres, faced investigation, but charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence linking him directly to killings. He lived until 2004, age 93, active in veterans organizations. Numerous company and platoon commanders who directly participated in massacres were never identified, never prosecuted, lived normal post-war lives. The pattern repeats across Das Reich. Perpetrators known to investigators, but protected by legal technicalities, destroyed evidence, or lack of resources for prosecution. Survivors and victims' families watch men who murdered their loved ones walk free, contributing to lasting trauma and sense that justice was denied. The memory politics around Das Reich differ dramatically between East and West Germany during Cold War. East Germany uses Das Reich as propaganda tool, presenting SS divisions as proof of fascist barbarism and West Germany's failure to address Nazi past. East German textbooks and museums prominently feature Das Reich atrocities, using them to justify communist system as anti-fascist alternative. West Germany takes opposite approach, minimizing SS crimes while emphasizing Wehrmacht professional military conduct. This creates bizarre situation where same historical events receive completely different interpretation depending on which Germany examines them. West German military historians study Das Reich tactics while avoiding moral questions about atrocities. East German propagandists emphasize atrocities while lacking interest in tactical details. Neither approach provides complete historical understanding. The reunification of Germany in 1990 begins process of reconciling these competing narratives, but tensions persist about how to remember organizations like Das Reich that were simultaneously militarily effective and criminally brutal. The 1980s bring renewed historical interest in Das Reich as Cold War thaws and archives open. Military historians published detailed tactical studies analyzing Das Reich operations, extracting lessons about mobile warfare and combined arms coordination. These studies are professionally valuable, providing insights that inform modern military doctrine. NATO and Warsaw Pact forces study Das Reich tactics, implementing modified versions in their own training. But the tactical focus creates controversy. Victims' advocates argue that studying Das Reich military operations without emphasizing atrocities normalizes criminality and dishonors victims. They point out that Das Reich's tactical success often enabled or resulted from criminal conduct. Aggressive exploitation allowed massacres of bypassed populations. Refusal to accept conventional restraints produced both tactical advantages and war crimes. The debate reveals fundamental tension. Can we learn from history without valorizing perpetrators? Das Reich forces this question into sharp focus because their tactical innovations genuinely influenced military development, while their crimes remain undeniable and enormous. Oradour-sur-Glane becomes central memorial site for Das Reich's crimes. The French government preserves the destroyed village as permanent memorial, leaving ruins exactly as Das Reich left them in June 1944. Visitors walk through skeletal buildings, see burned-out cars, observe memorial markers, naming all 642 victims. The preserved church where women and children burned alive creates visceral emotional impact that written descriptions cannot match. 200,000 people visit Oradour annually, maintaining memory of Das Reich's criminality across generations. But as decades pass, the memorial faces challenges. The last survivor, Robert Hebras, died in 2023, ending direct witness testimony. Younger generations have no personal connection to events, viewing Oradour as distant history rather than lived tragedy. The memorial adapts by emphasizing broader lessons about how military organizations can descend into criminality, using Das Reich as case study for understanding how ordinary men become mass murderers. Contemporary controversies around Das Reich reveal unresolved tensions about military history and moral judgment. Neo-Nazi groups appropriate Das Reich imagery, using division insignia as symbols, while celebrating tactical achievements and denying or minimizing atrocities. Military history forums debate Das Reich operations, sometimes devolving into arguments about whether discussing tactical excellence constitutes glorification. Museum exhibits struggle with how to display Das Reich equipment and documents, balancing educational value against risk of valorization. Germany's Bundeswehr, the modern German military, explicitly rejects any connection to Wehrmacht or Waffen-SS, refusing to name bases after World War II commanders or display SS equipment in military museums. This creates awkward situation where arguably the most tactically innovative German division of World War II cannot be acknowledged by contemporary German military. The debates reflect broader societal uncertainty about how to remember military organizations that were effective and evil simultaneously. The question of Das Reich veterans reunions generates particular controversy. From 1950s through 2012, Das Reich survivors held regular gatherings where former comrades reminisced about shared experiences. Attendees typically framed these events as honoring fallen comrades and preserving brotherhood forged in combat. Critics viewed them as celebrations of criminal organization that should be prosecuted rather than commemorated. German authorities generally tolerated the reunions while monitoring them for illegal activity, particularly displays of Nazi symbols or denial of Holocaust. The reunions gradually ended as veterans died of old age, final gathering occurring in 2012 when surviving members were in their late 80s and 90s. The reunion's existence demonstrated how Das Reich veterans maintained collective identity decades after war's end, viewing their service as source of pride despite atrocities committed. This persistence of positive self-image among perpetrators troubles psychologists and historians, attempting to understand how people rationalize participation in mass murder. The historical assessment of Das Reich requires holding contradictory truths simultaneously. They were tactically innovative, pioneering combined arms coordination and aggressive mobile warfare that influenced post-war military doctrine globally. They were war criminals who systematically massacred civilians across occupied Europe. Both statements are true. Neither cancels the other. Das Reich demonstrated that military excellence and moral bankruptcy can coexist, that tactical skill and ideological extremism can reinforce rather than contradict each other. This is uncomfortable recognition because we prefer simpler narratives where effective soldiers are honorable and criminals are incompetent. Das Reich refuses this simplification. They were superb soldiers who committed terrible crimes. Their tactical achievements don't excuse their atrocities. Their atrocities don't negate their tactical achievements. Both realities exist simultaneously, creating moral complexity that resists easy resolution. The lessons Das Reich offers extend beyond World War II specifics to broader questions about military organizations and moral restraint. How do we prevent elite military units from descending into criminality? Das Reich suggests several risk factors: ideological indoctrination that dehumanizes enemies, organizational culture that values aggression over restraint, command structures that protect members from accountability, elite identity that creates sense of exemption from normal rules, and combat stress that erodes moral inhibitions. Modern militaries attempting to maintain ethical conduct must address these risk factors systematically. This requires more than legal codes and regulations. It requires institutional cultures that genuinely value ethical conduct, command climates that punish rather than protect criminal behavior, and training that maintains moral clarity even under combat stress. Das Reich demonstrates that absent these safeguards, even professionally competent military organizations can become instruments of genocide. The families of Das Reich veterans face impossible burdens across generations. Children and grandchildren of Das Reich soldiers must reconcile family love with historical evidence that relatives participated in mass murder. Some families acknowledge this reality, publicly recognizing ancestors' crimes while maintaining personal connection. Others construct elaborate rationalizations, claiming their relative was different from other Das Reich members, didn't participate in atrocities, had no choice in their actions. These rationalizations rarely withstand historical scrutiny, but provide psychological necessity for family members unwilling to view loved ones as war criminals. Third and fourth generation descendants particularly struggle with this legacy. They have no personal memory of relatives in question, but inherit reputation and sometimes documentation of crimes. Some become advocates for historical truth, using family history as cautionary tale. Others reject any connection, changing names or refusing to discuss family past. There are no good options for dealing with legacy of perpetrator ancestors. The past cannot be changed or escaped, only acknowledged and learned from. The memorial landscape across Europe reflects Das Reich's geographic scope. Oradour-sur-Glane in France, Yelnya in Russia, Toul in France, Budapest in Hungary, dozens of other locations where Das Reich fought or committed atrocities. Each site maintains memory differently, reflecting national experiences and priorities. French memorials emphasize civilian victimization and resistance heroism. Russian memorials stress Soviet liberation of Slavic peoples from fascist oppression. Hungarian sites acknowledge collaboration with Nazis while highlighting Hungarian suffering. German sites increasingly recognize Wehrmacht and SS criminality. After decades of minimization, the varying memorialization reveals how World War II memory remains contested terrain, with different nations constructing narratives that serve contemporary political purposes. Das Reich appears in all these narratives, but always interpreted through national lens that shapes remembrance according to present needs, rather than historical complexity. The ultimate question Das Reich poses is whether we can separate tactical excellence from moral judgment when studying military history. Professional military education continues analyzing Das Reich operations, extracting lessons about armor employment and combined arms coordination. Lessons are technically valid and operationally valuable. Modern armored forces use doctrinal concepts that Das Reich helped develop. But teaching these concepts requires acknowledging their origin in criminal organization that committed systematic atrocities. Some argue this acknowledgement is sufficient. that we can learn from perpetrators without endorsing their crimes. Others contend that studying Das Reich tactics without constantly foregrounding their atrocities creates implicit valorization, suggesting that military effectiveness matters more than moral conduct. The debate has no easy resolution. Military professionals need to learn from history, including history made by criminals. But this learning must occur within framework that never loses sight of moral catastrophe that accompanied tactical achievement. Das Reich can teach us about warfare, but only if we simultaneously learn about war crimes. The division's legacy is not their tactics or their courage, but their warning about what happens when military excellence serves moral collapse. The final accounting remains incomplete, because Das Reich's impact extends beyond measurable statistics. Yes, they killed 21,000 of their own soldiers through combat casualties. Yes, they murdered 23,000 civilians in documented massacres. Yes, they influenced post-war military doctrine through tactical innovations. But the deeper impact is psychological and cultural, proof that ordinary men can become mass murderers, that elite institutions can systematically produce criminals, that societies can fail to deliver justice, even when crimes are documented and perpetrators known. Das Reich forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, organizational dynamics, and historical memory. We want to believe that evil is aberrant, that good institutions produce good results, that justice prevails eventually. Das Reich suggests these beliefs are often wrong. Evil can be systematic and institutional. Effective organizations can serve criminal purposes. Justice is often denied or delayed beyond meaning. These lessons are more important than tactical doctrine or operational analysis. Das Reich's ultimate legacy is not teaching us how to fight, but reminding us why moral restraint matters, why institutional culture shapes individual behavior, why accountability cannot be deferred indefinitely without consequences that echo across generations. The division that called itself Das Reich, the empire, became empire of ashes and unmarked graves, testament to what military excellence without moral foundation produces: tactical triumph and humanitarian catastrophe inseparably fused, neither comprehensible without the other, both demanding remembrance that neither celebrates nor forgets.